Chapter 179. Feeling the naked and undisguised gaze, Su followed the line of sight and saw Wu Xiuxiu. She pretended to be stunned and then nodded with a smile. Her heart was cold. She didn't have time to deal with the Wu family, but the brother and sister hurried to make trouble for her. Did they really think that they didn't have a long life? Seeing the kind smile on Su Li's face, Wu Xiuxiu was stunned. Xia Huer immediately came out. A sense of humiliation came to her heart. This bitch. Did she think that she could be on an equal footing with Su Li because she had a relationship with the Ling family? How dare she greet her in such a humble manner? If it weren't for the wrong occasion, she would rush over and slap the bitch who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Wu Xiuxiu's chest rose and fell violently. She suppressed her anger. Wu Jin soon found that. He followed Wu Xiuxiu's eyes and saw Su Li. His eyes were a little deeper, but he smiled lightly and said a few words in Wu Xiuxiu's ear. Wu Xiuxiu immediately turned from anger to joy. She held Wu Jin's arm and acted like a spoiled child. She also showed off to Su Li. Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly. It was not suitable to explore with psychic awareness on this occasion. Wu Jin didn't let her see his lips. She didn't know what the brother and sister whispered to each other. However, even if Wu Jin wanted to continue to fight with her, he had to consider the current situation in Yunjing City. What happened in the Su family had attracted the attention of all princes. If Wu Jin dared to fight with her rashly, she didn't need to fight with him personally. The eldest son of the general would be killed. The first prince is here. The sharp voice of the eunuch with cultivation spread through the audience and fell clearly into everyone's ears. Su Li looked up and saw that there was one more person on the high platform. It was Dongfang Sheng in a golden robe. He was high-spirited and reckless. He didn't lower his voice when he met Chu Lu at all. The one who shouted was Eunuch Feng, whom she met in the waterside pavilion in the south of the city that day. Su Li didn't know whether the emperor came in person today. After Dongfang Sheng sat down, Eunuch Feng shouted again, "The third prince is here." The scene of the royal family couldn't be small. Princes and princesses must learn to be familiar with the high platform from an early age. The third prince, Dongfang Lang, who was also wearing a golden robe with a different pattern, floated over. His footsteps were light and quick, as if there was wind under his feet. His expression was calm, as if he was stepping on the void as he ascended the high platform. He was a refined scholar with high cultivation, causing the young talents below the platform to exclaim in admiration. Dongfang Sheng was gloomy for a moment, and then he became happy in an instant. He got up and smiled. Then, the fifth prince Dongfang Yang appeared. Compared with Dongfang Lang, he was ordinary, but he was the most handsome among the princes. He was known as the most handsome man in Yunjing City. As soon as Dongfang Yangfang appeared, his clothes fluttered in the wind. His handsome face, which was as gentle as jade, immediately caused many women to scream. The first prince's face was even more unsightly. Even fifth brother's extravagance was inferior to him. If father heard this, how could he take over the Eastern Palace? Su Li looked at the princes on the high platform with interest. She sighed in her heart. Sure enough, they were born in the royal family. Their acting skills were not bad. Dongfang Sheng and Dongfang Lang fought fiercely in secret. When they appeared in front of outsiders, they immediately became brothers. It was really interesting. At this moment, Eunuch Feng shouted again, "The seventh prince is here." Su Li was a little surprised. She looked at the last prince who appeared. She was a little dignified. The seventh prince, Dongfang Wuxue. Dongfang Wuxue was only 12 years old this year. With a thought, a child no taller than 4 feet slowly climbed onto the platform. His appearance could not be said to be cute, nor could it be said to be handsome. It was just a plain, ordinary face. His mother was not favored in the palace and could be said to be the weakest prince in the palace. The seventh brother is here, the high platform is very steep. Don't fall." The three of them smiled and said considerate words, but no one went to help Dongfang Wuxue. Dongfang Wuxue was too young. The emperor was old and was about to abdicate. None of them regarded the seventh brother as a competitor. Only Su Li knew that in the previous life, the seventh prince, who looked ordinary, suddenly became the next emperor of the Dehan country. No one knew the specific reason. After all the princes arrived, Eunuch Feng went to the high platform and announced the reward of the autumn hunting for the emperor. It was normal for the emperor to stay in the palace for many years. The families didn't feel strange. They secretly discussed which prince could live in the East Palace. Recently, the emperor was old and weak. He was not as energetic as before. It seemed that he wanted to choose a crown prince. Ling Li was half lying in the wheelchair. He was dozing off. His mouth was still drooling. The disciples in the surrounding seats couldn't help but show their disgust and turned their heads. Ling Li was really the shame of the young people in Yunjing City. Looking at Ling Li's acting, Su Li laughed in her heart. Her attention was still on the princes. The princes must come to watch the autumn hunting every year. If they reached the age of 18, they must participate in the autumn hunting experience. They couldn't be lazy. The first prince, the third prince and the fifth prince were all over 18 years old. After a while, only Dongfang Wuxue was watching the show on the high platform. God feels that it is not easy for people to live in the world. This year, the weather is good, the country is prosperous and the people are at peace. The autumn hunting contest will be held as scheduled. If a young talent has extraordinary performance and wins the first prize, he can enter the palace to meet the emperor and listen to the god's grace. He will also receive the superior mental cultivation method of Xiangong, the magic weapon Hongyuan sword and a precious branch. Then, Eunuch Feng took out the book and the sword and put them on the high platform. It immediately attracted a lot of people's attention to the thin book. The secret method of Xiangong. It was the key to the poor disciples. Only by getting the Xiangong could they break through the limit of the common people and become real warriors. If they could reach the inborn realm, they could change their fate and be valued by the imperial court. They could even open up their own families. Which poor disciple would be able to endure such temptation? In the end, Eunuch Feng put the trunk of a withered tree on the table and explained happily, "This thing is offered by a small country. It is not only invulnerable to swords and spears, but also difficult to be melted by real fire. His Majesty specially chose this thing and gave it to the destined person." After he said that, the audience didn't respond. It was difficult to attract attention if they couldn't see the actual benefits. But there were 3 people on the seats of the Ling mansion who fixed their eyes on the branch. The bark was like a feather and the grain was like a bird. It was not an unknown withered tree. It was clearly the branch of the kurong tree. Since Su Li made an agreement with him, he checked a lot of precious ancient books to get the appearance of the kurong tree. The Tianya house tried its best to search, but they couldn't get any information about the branch of the kurong tree. He didn't expect that the kurong tree suddenly appeared in front of him today. It was really a case of wearing out iron shoes in fruitless searching, but finding it by chance. The second brother's cultivation was the highest among all the people, and his age didn't exceed the limit of the contest. With the help of Ling Qinglan, it was easy to get the branch of the kurong tree. Qinglan. He transmitted the sound in silence to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan's heart sank slightly. He vaguely grasped his chest, but he still nodded and transmitted the sound in silence, "I know. This time, I will try my best to help second brother win the title of the champion." Hearing Ling Qinglan's response, Ling Li grinned and pulled Ling Ping's sleeve. Ling Ping turned his head in confusion. When he saw Ling Li, who didn't look like a playboy but looked serious, he couldn't help but be shocked. He said, "Second brother, I don't ask you for anything. But I must get the branch of the withered tree." Ling Ping, who just wanted to relax, immediately changed his mind. He was full of fighting spirit and solemnly whispered, "Second brother, I will win it for you." Indeed, the third brother never asked him for anything. Even if the third brother didn't know the origin of the withered tree, he must fight for it. What's more, it seemed that the third brother recognized what the withered tree was. Ling Ping glanced at those who didn't take the name of the dried branch seriously. He couldn't help but smile. They all said that the third brother was ignorant and incompetent. But today, none of the so-called talented scholars recognized the dried branch. Only the third brother recognized it. How could they continue to say that the third brother was a waste? He often heard Ling Li's playboy theory. Although he didn't say it, it didn't mean that he was not angry. Today was a good time to vent his anger. Mother, Qinglan and I will go first, Ling Ping said and turned to prepare. Since it was the autumn hunting contest, good horses and bows were indispensable. Su Li stood up and smiled, thank you for your care all the way. I also want to have a look. If I come to the autumn hunting contest but don't participate, it will be a pity. Su Li's reason couldn't be refuted. Mrs. Gu didn't stop her. Instead, she laughed and said, go ahead. Since you regard me as your goal, you should be aware of it. In addition, she saw that Su Li had the cultivation of the acquired 8th hurdle. As long as she didn't encounter dozens of beasts at the same time, she would not be in danger. Under the control of the Northwest hunting ground, it was impossible for beasts to gather together. So, there was no danger at all. However, because women were born weak, only a few female warriors dared to participate in the contest. Ling Li stared at Su Li leaving and didn't speak. This girl was proficient in refining the secret medicine. Her cultivation might not be far from his. All the beasts in the hunting ground couldn't be her opponent. What did she want to do? Did she want to get the branch of the kurong tree in person and then let him increase the bargaining chip? Don't watch her. She has gone far away. If you really like Miss Su, don't fool around all day. Spend more time on her. Xiao Meng patted Ling Li's shoulder gently and scolded him. Ling Li came back to himself and smiled. He couldn't say that he had a close relationship with Su Li and even slept on her bed. When the sundial turned the hour, Eunuch Feng's sharp voice broke through the void. The huge and heavy iron gate of the hunting ground finally opened slowly. The autumn hunting contest starts now. For a time, thousands of horses galloped and the noise shook the sky. Su Li's horse was not good. She fell into the last group of people. Her horse was randomly chosen from the horse farm outside the hunting ground. Because she didn't plan to participate in the autumn hunting at the beginning. Just as Ling Li thought, the level of the Northwest hunting ground was too low for her. She was not interested in it at all. However, Wu Jin had a lot of bad ideas. Ling Qinglan might not be able to take action. It was hard to guarantee that Ling Ping wouldn't be secretly set up. Wu Xiuxiu's smile also made her care. If she couldn't get the branch of the kurong tree, she would be very troubled. It was easier to take action in the dark. After thinking about it, she thought it was better to take action by herself. As the horses ran, everyone's sight was out of the observation of the people on the high platform. Chapter 180. Roar. The tiger's roar came from all directions, and the horse neighed uneasily. The young man standing in the middle of the open space was pale and sweaty. He pulled the hemp rope and kept observing. He grasped the arrow in his hand tightly and his pupils shrank in fear. Didn't they say that there were not many beasts in the hunting ground? Why did I meet one as soon as I came up? Roar! Roar! The whistling sound was getting closer and closer, almost reaching his ears. The young man had already lost his composure. He got off the horse and leaned on its back, staring at the other side. However, he did not notice that a majestic tiger was quietly approaching him, its eyes filled with cruelty and fierceness. Nay! The horse had a keen intuition. It was frightened and immediately ran wildly. The moment the young man suddenly turned back, he suddenly saw the tiger rushing at him. The tiger's head was enlarged in his eyes, and even the sun in the sky was completely covered by it. It's over. The young man was so scared that he collapsed on the ground and completely lost the ability to resist. He closed his eyes and waited for death. Suddenly, puff! The sound of the long sword piercing the flesh was heard, and then a plop came into the young man's ears. It seemed that a heavy object fell on the ground. Then he smelled a strong smell of blood. I am not dead. The young man opened his eyes and saw his intact hands. Then he looked up and saw a tiger without a pair of ears. He didn't see anyone selling it from beginning to end. After a while, he finally ran to the high platform crazily. Ghost. Mom, I want to go home. The hunting ground is so terrible. Suli, who was hiding in the forest, shook her head slightly. He dared to come here without hunting experience. No wonder many people died in the autumn hunting every year. Counting this pair of tiger ears, it should be the 37th tiger. Continue. After counting the harvest in the bag, Suli flashed away. She didn't know where the horse was. The speed was not as fast as using the martial arts movement. At this moment, the same scene was happening on the other side of the hunting ground. Qinglan, count how many there are. Ling Ping wiped his sweat and took a breath. For Ling Li, he kept looking for beasts to kill. But the hunting ground was too big, and he was only in the inborn first hurdle. He couldn't completely abandon the horse and only rely on the martial arts movement. Besides, even if he couldn't leave Ling Qinglan alone. After all, Ling Qinglan hadn't reached the inborn realm. 25 in total. Hearing Ling Qinglan's words, Ling Ping's eyes brightened. He said, good luck. But Wu Jin is out of the game. We can't take it lightly. Let's go deeper. It's not easy to hear Ling Li ask for help. I can't let him down. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly and drove the horse to follow them. The scope of his psychic awareness was much larger than that of Ling Ping. Although he couldn't fight with others now, he could deliberately guide Ling Ping to a certain direction. Therefore, the so-called luck became inevitable. If there was no accident, Ling Ping would win the first place. 3 days were enough for them to hunt nearly half of the beasts in the hunting ground. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 3rd day. Ling Qinglan's eyes were dark. He sat on the horse and looked tired. Ling Ping couldn't help but scold him with a smile. I told you to practice hard and not to get involved in cases. But you didn't listen. Now, you can't even last for 3 days and 3 nights. I'll definitely get your aunt to teach you a lesson later. Ling Qinglan could only bow his head and accept Ling Ping's reprimand. He didn't expect that he could barely maintain the basic life. The speed of the efficacy of the medicine was much faster than he imagined. Is it because of the frequent use of the psychic awareness these days? Ling Qinglan secretly gritted his teeth. This body was really useless. While he was annoyed, Ling Qinglan didn't find that the surrounding illusion was slowly changing. The noises in the surrounding jungle suddenly disappeared and it became dead silent. Ling Ping noticed it, but it was too late. Well? Where is this place? The light in the jungle quickly dimmed. It was dark in the blink of an eye. Ling Ping's expression changed slightly. His muscles tightened and he immediately protected the heavy prey hanging on the horse. Who is sneaking around? This is the northwest hunting ground, the royal land. If you dare to kill me here, you should think about the consequences. The first thought in Ling Ping's mind was that it was his sworn enemy, Wu Jin. But according to Wu Jin's cautious character, he would never kill him on this occasion if he was not absolutely sure. Otherwise, if his grandmother was angry, it would be enough to shake the situation of the Dahan country. Even the death of his father and grandfather would be blamed on the Wu family by his grandmother. At that time, even if the emperor didn't want to kill the Wu family, he had to. Wu Jin wouldn't do the strategy of mutual destruction. Ling Qinglan forced himself to get down from the horse. He staggered and looked even more terrible. His psychic awareness detected that there were as many as 5 seniors of the inborn realm. Even if he could kill them, he was absolutely no match for them. What's more, they trapped them with the tactical matrix in advance. This was a surefire way to kill him. The royal family had been established for hundreds of years and had a profound foundation. The entire northwest hunting ground was protected by a big tactical matrix. Even a senior at the peak of the inborn realm couldn't break in. Unless they all sneaked in through formal channels. But the students of the National Academy relied on the jade token that was connected with their own bloodline. Other big families also had a quota limit. If a stranger sneaked in, he would be found out at a glance. What kind of person could secretly arrange for someone to sneak into the hunting ground and assassinate them? Ling Qinglan slowly walked to Ling Ping and stood back to back. A fan appeared in his hand. He deduced and looked for the flaws of the tactical matrix. But he soon found that the level of the tactical matrix was too high, far beyond the scope that he could solve. Qinglan. Ling Ping suddenly whispered, I will aim at the northwest and forcibly open a hole. You must escape. The Ling family needs someone to support it. This group of people was likely to come for him. Then, Qinglan would have a chance to escape. If there was no man in the Ling family who was an official in the imperial court, the Ling family would be like a fish on the chopping block. His grandma, mother and brother would not have a good end. He absolutely could not allow that situation to happen. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly. Ignorance was fearless. If he knew that he had detected 8 breaths above the inborn 4th hurdle, he would not say such optimistic words. However, even if he had to die today, he would bite off a piece of the enemy's flesh. Ling Qinglan's eyes were fierce, and the breath of the inborn 3rd hurdle began to brew. Swish! 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 8 black shadows appeared at the same time. They knew that they were walking on the edge of a knife. If they delayed, there would be changes. They didn't say any nonsense and instantly attacked. Every move was aimed at the fatal point. The majestic breath of the inborn realm submerged Ling Ping like a wave. Ling Ping's face instantly became pale. At this moment, he finally understood what was called a desperate situation. Ling Ping held the saber horizontally to block his vital point. He gritted his teeth and wanted to bear the 8 attacks. He knew that he might not be able to bear them. But if he stepped aside, Ling Qinglan behind him would definitely die. Second brother, get out of the way. Ling Ping was shocked for a moment when he heard Ling Qinglan's words. But he still believed in his brother. He rolled on the ground and barely dodged all kinds of weapons. Knives, spears, sticks came to Ling Qinglan's face in the blink of an eye. The next moment, Ling Qinglan would be split into 2 halves. Qinglan. Ling Ping was furious, but Ling Qinglan's expression was cold. In the face of danger, he didn't hesitate. The folding fan in his hand was broken into half, and countless poisonous needles flew out from it. They covered the 8 people like flying flowers. The poisonous needles were made of 1,000-year-old cold iron. It was easy for them to pierce the inborn shield. Want to kill me? Unless you are willing to die with me. Shockingly, it was a method of mutual destruction. The situation changed suddenly. The faces of the 8 killers in the inborn realm changed slightly. Of course, they didn't want to die with him. What's more, their target was not Ling Qinglan but Ling Ping. Almost in an instant, all the killers chose to defend. For a time, the poisonous needles and weapons collided with each other. Clang sounds were constantly heard. Ling Qinglan was relieved. He flashed to Ling Ping's side. He threw the remaining half of the fan at the feet of the 2 killers and ran the secret method forcefully. His fan was made of materials collected by the Yinma cult for 5 years and the famous refining master in the martial arts circle. It could fight with magic weapons at ordinary times. At the critical moment, it could be a peerless treasure for both attack and defense. It was because he carried this fan with him that he had the confidence to reverse the situation when facing the 8 killers in the Inborn realm. In Ling Ping's shocked eyes, the remaining half of the fan expanded with the wind. In the blink of an eye, it was big enough for 2 people to stand. The yin and yang fish rotated on it. A transparent barrier extended out and instantly turned into a protective tactical matrix. It was too late for the 8 killers to react. Damn it! How could there be such a change? The leading killer looked ferocious. He looked at the protective tactical matrix with light constantly flowing on the surface. The quality was absolutely not a low-level tactical matrix that could be broken by a senior in the Inborn realm. Ling Qinglan had such a treasure. Qinglan, why do you? Ling Ping's eyes were full of doubts. He found that he couldn't see through his cousin. Whether it was the poisonous needles or the tactical matrix, they were far beyond the scope of his understanding. Ling Qinglan heard Ling Ping's words and smiled reluctantly. When he was about to deal with it, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell down. Ling Ping's expression changed greatly. He quickly grabbed Ling Qinglan and said, Qinglan. Qinglan. How are you? As soon as his hands touched Ling Qinglan's hands, his pupils shrank and he was full of horror. How could Ling Qinglan's body be so cold? He was like a dead person. He looked down at the blood on his chest. There was a layer of frost on it. It took a long time for it to fade away. This was not the injury just now. Even if Ling Ping was stupid, he understood at this moment that Ling Qinglan had a disease in his body. He remembered that a few years ago, his cousin was extremely weak. No matter how many clothes he wore, he always shrank his body. Later, he was inexplicably cured. Ling Ping thought that he was cured by the doctor, so he didn't care about it. Now thinking of it, Ling Ping knew that the disease had not been cured at all. In the carriage, he refused Su Li's diagnosis. Maybe he already knew this. But in the past 2 days, he took Ling Qinglan to run around and even laughed at him for delaying his practice. He didn't notice the abnormality at all. Damn it! Qinglan, you must hold on. I will ask Su Li to cure you immediately. She is the apprentice of the miracle-working doctor. She must have a way. At this moment, the killers outside the tactical matrix had begun to bombard it. Ling Ping didn't have time to pay attention to them. He called Ling Qinglan again and again. He was afraid that Ling Qinglan would die in his arms like his eldest brother. Ling Ping's words came from the sky. It was far away and inaudible. Ling Qinglan's pupils were dilated and fixed in the void. He seemed to see the happy time in the Yi family many years ago. Dad, Mom, I am too tired. I want to find you, but I haven't avenged you. I'm not reconciled. With a groan, Ling Qinglan began to focus his eyes. He looked up and saw Ling Ping, who was crying. The young general, who had never shed tears, was full of panic and hesitation at this moment. Chapter 181. Ling Qinglan's weak voice came. Ling Ping was shocked and immediately overjoyed. He held Ling Qinglan's hands tightly and said, Qinglan. I'm here. Don't cry. Then, he wiped his nose hard and showed a smile that was uglier than crying. Ling Qinglan slowly took out a jade bottle from his chest. Without saying anything, Ling Ping immediately took a handful of elixirs and put them into Ling Qinglan's mouth. 2 is enough. It's useless to eat more. Ling Qinglan swallowed 2 elixirs. The efficacy of the elixirs spread in his body. His cold body quickly returned to normal temperature. He gasped and sat up. Looking at the killers who bombarded the protective tactical matrix tirelessly, he couldn't help but sneer, you are really persistent. I want to see how long you can persist. This is the Northwest hunting ground. The longer you stay here, the faster you will die. The leading killer stopped for a moment, and then bombarded more fiercely. Ling Qinglan sighed in his heart. He didn't expect that it was counterproductive. These killers in the inborn realm were like the men of sacrifice trained by the Shalu cult. They didn't care about their own lives at all. Second brother, although the tactical matrix is good, it will be broken in a quarter of an hour without follow-up energy supply. At that moment, I will control the explosion of the tactical matrix. Maybe I can blow up the trap tactical matrix. That moment is the best time to escape. Ling Ping was shocked by Ling Qinglan's transmitted sound. It turned out that Brother Lan's cultivation had already reached the acquired 8th hurdle. Qinglan, your injury, there is no medicine to cure the cold poison. Even if you invite Qi Xianqing, the result will be the same. At this moment, I can use the last bit of time to create a way for you to survive. My life is not in vain. Ling Qinglan smiled freely and didn't hide anything. The autumn hunting contest would end in half a day. No one in the hunting ground could compete with these 8 people. They would definitely die this time. There was no need for him to hide anything. Ling Ping's face immediately turned pale. His lips trembled and he wanted to say something. But finally, he found that he had no words and couldn't say anything. Second brother, don't be sad. I am weak. It's the best gift from God that I can live for 14 years. But I still haven't found out the reason why my family was destroyed. Ling Qinglan said with pity. Ling Ping felt complicated and said in a low voice, after going back. I will ask Chen Gong to continue to investigate the case of the Yi family for you. In the face of despair, he had already recognized the current situation. He no longer naively believed that the two of them could escape. In fact, whether he could escape or not was still a variable. Kacha, the light on the transparent shield dimmed, and a crack finally appeared. When the assassins saw the crack, it was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They used all their strength to attack the crack, causing it to expand continuously. Ling Qinglan saw that the yin-yang fish under his feet began to crack from the middle, and he couldn't help but shake his head. If he controlled the tactical matrix, even the inborn 9th hurdle would need to bombard it for more than an hour. Unfortunately, his body was like a porcelain that was full of cracks and could not withstand the recoil of the array. He could only use his last bit of strength to detonate the array. As the cracks gradually expanded in his eyes like a spider web, Ling Ping's body gradually tightened. Whether he could survive or not depended on God. Second brother. Ling Qinglan moved slightly. He was in the yin and yang sides. In Ling Ping's confused eyes, he suddenly said, go back and say sorry to Ling Li for me. Boom. Ling Ping had no time to ask, and the tactical matrix had been blasted. Ling Qinglan shouted and pressed his hands on the yin and yang sides, explode. Boom. A more violent explosion appeared in front of Ling Qinglan and attacked the 8 assassins. Ling Ping was full of grief and indignation. He instantly rushed out from behind Ling Qinglan and roared, Brother Lan, I will pass your words to Brother Li. The huge smoke and dust slowly dispersed. Ling Ping leaned against the edge of the darkness with a blank face. He supported Ling Qinglan who was coughing blood. He was at a loss. The trap tactical matrix did not disappear. He even tried his best to cut the edge of the tactical matrix, but the result was a broken knife. The heavens were not on their side. Ling Qinglan's pale face showed a bitter smile. Second brother, it seems that we are destined to die this time. I have no strength to fight anymore. Ling Ping saw the 8 assassins of the inborn realm rushing to him with monstrous killing intent behind the smoke and dust. He threw the broken long knife on the ground and showed a deep helplessness. You have done a good job. Second brother, is useless. But at this moment, a little cold light appeared in the darkness. In Ling Qinglan's astonished gaze, it suddenly expanded. Clatter. The bright sunlight penetrated in, followed by an afterimage. Puff. 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 3 heads flew into the sky, and a rain of blood filled the sky. The remaining 5 people retreated in horror. They finally saw the person clearly. It was a young man in cyan with red lips and white teeth. You want to kill the Ling family? Have you asked me? Su Li's face was full of killing intent. Her tone was cold, and her eyes almost froze the remaining 5 people of the Inborn realm. They had never seen such a terrible teenager. Inborn master. His cultivation was far beyond theirs. They were no match for him. The assassination plan failed. These thoughts emerged in the minds of the 5 people at the same time. Then, without any hesitation, they fled in 5 directions. Su Li's face was colder. She opened her hands, and the weapons and countless poisonous needles on the ground floated up one after another. They were divided into 5 directions as if they had spirits. They penetrated the void in a blink of an eye and reached the assassins' backs. Plop! 5 corpses fell to the ground almost at the same time. They wanted to escape in front of the AO sword skills. No way. In just a few seconds, the 8 people of the Inborn realm died. Ling Qinglan and Ling Ping were shocked. They stood still and didn't know what to do. The 8 people of the Inborn realm who forced them into a desperate situation didn't even have time to breathe in the hands of the teenager. It was terrible. There was such a young master in Yunjing City. Ling Ping couldn't help but swallow. When he came to his senses, he found that he and Ling Qinglan survived miraculously. Tick. A drop of sweat dripped down Su Li's cheek. On the last day, she was looking for Ling Ping's trace. She found the fluctuation of the tactical matrix nearby. Then, she almost rushed here without stopping and finally caught up with him. However, it seemed that the tactical matrix had been rooted for almost 10 minutes. Thanks to Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan, they could resist the 8 people for such a long time. Su Li breathed a sigh of relief and turned around with a warm smile on her face. She said, Lord Ling, I haven't seen you for a long time. How are you? The greeting was the same as that night. Ling Qinglan stared at the teenager in cyan in a daze. He was shocked and said, Li. Mr. Li. Who is Mr. Li? Ling Ping was at a loss. He couldn't understand Ling Qinglan. How could he know such a young master with unfathomable cultivation? I have met him once in the Supreme Judiciary. Ling Qinglan explained in a hurry. He stepped forward and bowed deeply, this time. Mr. Li, thank you for saving our lives. This gratitude was sincere. This time, they were really pulled back from the gates of hell by Su Li. If Su Li came one step later, the consequences would be unimaginable. Su Li waved her hand and calmed down. Then she took back the 5 corpses that escaped and put them on the ground. She put them in a row with the other 3 people. After lifting the black cloth on their faces, Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan couldn't help but look closer. But they were all strange faces. Sure enough, they are all secretly trained men of sacrifice. Ling Qinglan frowned and said to himself. Then he smiled and said, but this time, Mr. Li killed 8 people in the Inborn realm. The hidden force must be greatly weakened. Su Li didn't say anything. She tied up the 8 corpses and put them aside. Then she took out a thin piece of paper from her arms and wrote a line of words with blood. Then she handed it to Ling Qinglan along with a cyan elixir. You are really not afraid of death. You even dare to eat the Lijue elixir. Have you even written a will? Hearing Su Li's teasing words, Ling Qinglan's face changed slightly. Sure enough, she saw through him. I went back and thought about it. I found that you are wrong. You abused the cold poison and were still vigorous. Do you really think that the cold poison is a sick cat? Su Li scolded in a tone of an elder, if I didn't find it early, you should die here today. That guy in your study should be dead in 2 days. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly and let Su Li scold him. Because, Mr. Li was right. I came out in a hurry. I don't have any elixir. You eat it first to stabilize your injury. Tomorrow, come here alone to find me. Su Li said. She didn't look at Ling Ping. She took the corpse and disappeared. Ling Qinglan looked at the bloody words in his hand. It was a very remote alley. Did Mr. Li live there? Ling Ping enjoyed being ignored, but he was very happy. He quickly let Ling Qinglan swallow the elixir. Although he didn't know what the Li Jue elixir was, it was definitely not a good thing according to Mr. Li's tone. By the way, it is troublesome to hold it. I will give it to you. Su Li came back and threw a sack at Ling Ping's feet. Ling Ping opened it and was even more shocked. There were hundreds of pairs of beast ears in it. In addition, the prey they hunted in the past 2 days accounted for 70% of the beasts in the hunting ground. The first place of the autumn hunting contest was already in the bag. Ling Ping was really surprised that such an unfathomable person would deal with the beasts that were not even in the inborn hurdle. However, Ling Qinglan thought deeply. Did Mr. Li always pay attention to the Ling family in recent days? Otherwise, he couldn't appear in such a timely manner. Phew, Ling Qinglan relaxed and breathed a sigh of relief. He carried the sack on his back and said with a smile, "Second brother, I don't know what Mr. Li's purpose is. But no matter what, we've survived today's crisis. Let's go." Ling Ping was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled again. He grabbed the sack from Ling Qinglan and carried it on his back. He said with a smile, "I know that no matter how much you hide, you still care about the Ling family. I won't ask you anymore. After today, you must find Mr. Li. Maybe he has a different vision and can really cure the cold poison." Ling Qinglan nodded and felt warm in his heart. His smile was more sincere than before. He never regarded himself as a member of the Ling family, but the Ling family treated him as their own. He shouldn't have such a mentality. Chapter 182. After Su Li returned the clothes to the young man who fainted in the grass, she followed the trajectory of the tactical matrix and found a flaw that she had agreed with Fang Yuan and others before. However, it was difficult to make a perfect tactical matrix. The northwest hunting ground covered an area of hundreds of thousands of hectares. It was too large and had been in disrepair for a long time. Naturally, there would be many weaknesses in the tactical matrix. People who didn't know the tactical matrix had no way to deal with these weaknesses. But if someone was proficient in the tactical matrix, he could use the flaws to forcibly create an entrance and exit that could be passed in a short time. Unfortunately, Su Li had studied the tactical matrix for a period of time in her previous life and was guided by a famous teacher. Although she was not superb in the tactical matrix, she could be regarded as a real tactical matrix master. She didn't need to create any entrance and exit at all. She could directly walk out of the big tactical matrix with her own strength. In the wasteland outside the city, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning were practicing and waiting patiently. Yin Xuedong was busy with the business of the Linli building. Recently, the business of the Linli building was a little better. They also recruited 1 or 2 temporary waiters to help. When the first batch of people trained in the secluded site came out, there would be enough people. Damn the weather. It's a sunny day. Why does it start to rain? Chu Qingning licked his lips and opened the water bag. Fang Yuan slowly opened his eyes and looked at the tactical matrix barrier that could not be seen but could be touched. Although he was not worried about Su Li's safety, it was difficult to ensure that Su Li needed help in the hunting ground. Therefore, they agreed to meet Su Li outside the tactical matrix. Fang Yuan also knew for the first time that the big tactical matrix of the northwest hunting ground was not really inaccessible. It turned out that Su Li's attainments in the tactical matrix were so high. At this time, the nothingness in front of everyone rippled, and then they saw Su Li dragging 8 corpses out. 3 of them had their heads buckled on the waist. It was really horrible. Puff, Chu Qingning was drinking water from the water bag. Seeing Su Li in this shape, he immediately sprayed water everywhere. "Su Li, what are you, Fang Yuan stood up and looked dignified. Su Li threw the corpses in front of everyone and said quickly, "Take them back. They are useful to me. Wait for me to go back." After saying this, Su Li turned around and disappeared into the tactical matrix in the blink of an eye. Fang Yuan came to check. The corpses were still warm. They had just died, and the inborn pneuma had not completely dissipated. These people were all in the inborn realm. Oh. 8 innates? When did innates become so worthless? Chu Qingning sighed, and his eyes changed. He really felt that his cultivation could not keep up with Su Li's, and he had to practice harder. Su Li returned to the hunting ground and pretended to hunt a few small preys. Then she leisurely followed the tracks of Ling Ping and Fang Yuan and returned to the high platform. It took a lot of time to find the flaws of the tactical matrix. At this moment, it was close to the end of the meeting. So, Su Li had no time to talk with Fang Yuan and hurried back to the hunting ground. Eunuch Feng led a group of trusted eunuchs to count the casualties and the beast ears. Obviously, these eunuchs were not ordinary. All of them had achieved great cultivation and had experienced many hardships. No matter if someone came back with a broken arm or a broken leg, or a dead body, they would not be moved. Under the strange gaze of the eunuch, Su Li threw out a pair of rabbit ears and deer. She only killed them along the way, and the harvest was pitiful. That's all. Did she go on an autumn outing for the past 3 days? People around couldn't help but whisper. Looking at their harvest, they all had a sense of superiority. Even if they were mediocre, they were much better than this girl. Hey, isn't this Su Li? Finally, someone recognized Su Li. The surprised voice attracted the attention of a large group of people. The counting seats immediately became crowded. Where? Let me see. Don't push. A group of animals competed with each other. Finally, they didn't see Su Li leave from a special passage. The first person heard the previous discussion and couldn't help but sneer, "Miss Su Li is kind-hearted. Naturally, she will not do those things. What's wrong with an autumn outing? She is the disciple of the miracle-working Dr. Qi Xianqing. She doesn't lack martial arts and weapons. The rewards of the meeting are useless to her. She is so young, and her cultivation has reached the acquired 8th hurdle. She is much higher than any of us. If we really fight, which one of us is her opponent?" A group of ignorant people even had the face to laugh at Miss Su Li. "Yes. You are really ashamed for us men." A group of Su Li's fans stood up and instantly made the young man who had laughed at Su Li speechless and ashamed. The fight didn't reach Su Li's ears. Even if Su Li heard it, she would only laugh it off. She had long gotten rid of the childish and meaningless quarrel. "Miss Su is back." Fatty Tang stood up happily to greet her. Seeing Su Li's clothes were neat without any blood, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Miss Su, it's great that you are fine." After getting along with Su Li for many days in the affiliated school, Tang Lei's fear of Su Li subsided a little. Their relationship also improved. He called her Miss Su, instead of Lecturer Su. Su Li smiled and nodded, "I am going to see the scenery." Naturally, there is no danger. After saluting to Ms. Gu and Xiao Meng, Su Li sat back to her original position. She saw Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan in the surging crowd and the confused young man in cyan whose clothes were taken by her. Su Li sighed secretly. He happened to be nearby, and he happened to wear cyan clothes. She also kept some beast ears for him, which could be regarded as a way to calm him down. The master of the Wu family is here. General Ling Ping is also back. When the two main characters appeared, the crowd suddenly became quiet. Even those who were still queuing to count the beast ears consciously gave way. There was a big empty circle in front of the counting table. Wu Jin stood on one side, and Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan stood on the other side. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Ms. Gu frowned and looked at the audience. She didn't worry that Ping couldn't win the first prize, but there were many villains in the Wu family. This time, it was very likely that they would play tricks. If Ping didn't have a way to deal with it, he might lose. Haha, what a coincidence. Did second brother Ling just come back? Wu Jin smiled. It seemed that he had forgotten what happened in the waterside pavilion in the south of the city. Coincidence? Did the master of the Wu family read too many books? Is there something wrong with your brain? The time of the autumn hunting has come. If I don't come back, should I still watch outside? Ling Ping said sarcastically. He didn't care about Wu Jin at all, which made the crowd burst into laughter. Wu Jin didn't change his expression when he heard that. He waved his hand and said, "Of course not. Second brother Ling is really hot-tempered." At this time, Ling Qinglan sat on the ground without caring about his image. He was interested in Wu Jin's performance. With the help of Mr. Li, he was not worried about the result of the autumn hunting. However, Ling Li saw Ling Qinglan sit down suddenly. He frowned instantly. He seemed to be very tired. Did the cold poison take effect? Or, what happened in the past 2 days? No matter Wu Jin, Ling Ping, or Ling Qinglan, they were inevitably stained with blood. It was difficult to distinguish whether it was human blood or beast blood. Although the Yinma cult had a strong infiltration ability, it was not powerful enough to infiltrate the royal guards of the emperor. He didn't know what happened on the hunting ground. Ling Qinglan's expression of sitting down to watch the monkey show made Wu Jin's smile slightly stiff. He and Ling Qinglan were both the think tanks of the princes. Because of this, he hated Ling Qinglan very much. He hated Ling Qinglan even more than Ling Ping. Ling Ping moved one step and blocked Wu Jin's sight. He sneered and said, "You are hot-tempered because you see an annoying person. Master Wu is full of confidence. It seems that you are very confident about the autumn hunting. You flatter me. In terms of cultivation, I am not as good as second brother Ling. But I am a little bit luckier." Wu Jin grabbed the bag beside him and walked to the table. He poured out a lot of beast ears. The eunuchs who were counting were shocked and the crowd was in an uproar. So many. They are all beast ears of fierce beasts. There are also many 7-inch scales of big snakes. Someone couldn't help but take a deep breath and said. The amount of beast ears was much more than everyone else. How did Wu Jin kill so many beasts in just 3 days? The eunuchs quickly began to count and then announced, 18 pairs of large beast ears. 83 pairs of medium beast ears. 77 pairs of small beast ears. There are a total of 178 pairs. Nearly 200 pairs. It is close to 70% of the hunting ground. How is it possible? The crowd exclaimed and looked at Wu Jin with suspicion. It was hard to believe that one person accounted for 70% of the hunting ground. Wu Jin glanced at Ling Ping's expressionless face. He shrugged and said, "Second brother Ling, I am lucky. I picked up a sack of beast ears in the forest by chance." Although it is unfair to second brother Ling, the rules of the autumn hunting contest say that all the beast ears with the big tactical matrix mark are counted. I don't violate the rules, right? Eunuch Feng. Eunuch Feng was called and stood up. He replied with a smile, "Of course. What Mr. Wu said is right." The princes who had returned to the high platform and changed their clothes had different expressions when they saw this scene. The first Prince Dongfang Sheng and the third Prince Dongfang Lang raised their eyebrows at the same time. Wu Jin was so capable that he could even cheat in the autumn hunting contest. And it was so flawless that Eunuch Feng couldn't find a reason to refute. The fifth Prince Dongfang Yang smiled lightly. It seemed that he was not very interested in Wu Jin. As for the seventh Prince Dongfang Wuxue, he had fallen asleep in his seat. Clap, clap, clap. When Wu Jin thought that he was going to win, Ling Ping suddenly clapped his hands and said with a smile, Master Wu, you are really lucky. You can find so many beast ears. But I am also lucky. Let's have a competition. Let's see who can pick up more beast ears. What do you think? While speaking, Ling Ping picked up the sack with one hand and poured the beast ears on the ground. The beast ears piled up were no less than Wu Jin's. There was a burst of exclamation at the scene. Everyone looked at Wu Jin strangely. The total number of the beast ears of the two of them had far exceeded the number of the beasts raised in the hunting ground. One of them must have cheated. Ling Ping's cultivation seemed to be higher than Wu Jin's. Everyone naturally thought that Wu Jin cheated. And it was true. Wu Jin's face became very gloomy. He had prepared for almost half a year before he asked the tactical matrix master to simulate the big tactical matrix mark. The day before the opening of the hunting ground, he asked people to bury the beast ears in a specific place. But he didn't expect that Ling Ping could also hunt so many beast ears. How could it be possible? The best normal record in previous years was no more than 150 pairs. What method did Ling Ping use to hunt the beast ears? He wouldn't believe that the dignified Ling family would choose the same way as him to cheat. What's more, the Ling family didn't have a tactical matrix master. The only possibility was that these beast ears were really hunted by Ling Ping one by one. So, the problem came back to the original point. When Wu Jin was puzzled, the eunuch finally announced the result of Ling Ping's hunting. 38 pairs of large beast ears. 120 pairs of medium beast ears. 45 pairs of small beast ears. A total of 203 pairs. Boom! The crowd burst into cheers. Some people even began to shout, "General Ling is invincible." The shouts swept the whole place like a tide. Wu Jin's face was gloomy. His expression changed a few times. Finally, he left from the special passage without saying a word. He was like a wounded wolf hiding and licking his wounds alone. Eunuch Feng managed to suppress the shouts and walked to the high platform to announce the result. He said, "The champion of this autumn hunting contest is undoubtedly. It is General Ling Ping of the Ling family. 3 days later, the Baisho feast will be held in the name of General Ling Ping in the Shinwu Square in Yunjing. I hope you can come on time." Ling Ping stood on the high platform and took 3 rewards. He held them high. Wow! Chapter 183. When Ling Ping and Ling Qinglan returned to the seats of the Ling family, they received congratulations from the 2 women of the Ling family. "Ping, well done. You didn't disgrace the Ling family." Mrs. Gu was very comforted. Qiu Meng was so excited that she burst into tears and held Ling Ping's arm tightly. Ling Ping grinned and didn't mention the assassination. Instead, he walked to Ling Li and through the branch of the dead tree he just got to Ling Li without saying anything. Ling Li stared at the thing in his hand and couldn't help but ask, "Second brother, don't you ask what this branch is for?" Ling Ping laughed and said, "If younger brother Li wants it, I will give it to you. If you want to tell me, you will tell me. If you don't want to tell me, I won't ask. You and Qinglan have grown up." Ling Li was moved, and there was an impulse in his heart. He wanted to show everything he had secretly planned in these years. But before the impulse turned into action, Ling Ping's head was knocked by Mrs. Gu on the head. Mrs. Gu's words, "Boy, don't be complacent when you get the first prize. You are only 21 years old, which is the age to make progress. Don't talk like an old man." Ling Ping smiled embarrassedly. He didn't dare to argue with his grandma. He said, "Grandma, let's go home. There must be a traffic jam if we don't leave early." "You boy," Mrs. Gu scolded him with a smile and went back with the help of Qiu Meng. She was so happy that her grandson got the first prize. She walked briskly. "Second brother Ling, you are really a role model of our generation." Tang Lei was also infected by the atmosphere. He kept flattering Ling Ping while walking behind. Su Li walked aside with a faint smile. In this way, it was worthwhile for her to go there. The carriage was sent to the affiliated school of the National Academy, and Suli got off. Li, if you have time, you can come to the Ling house to chat with me. I heard that you are also good at cooking. I want to ask you for advice. Chiu Meng held Su Li's hand and didn't want to let go. Su Li smiled gently and said, Aunt Meng, you are welcome. I will come to bother you when I have time. Su Li was helpless. Chiu Meng asked her to call her Aunt Meng. She knew clearly what this woman wanted to do. But she had no reason to refuse. During this autumn hunt, he did not see anyone from Prime Minister Tang's residence. Instead, he got closer to the Ling residence. However, to be able to obtain a branch of the life and death tree was a pleasant surprise. As for the separation pill, Su Li frowned and turned into the affiliated school. The medicinal materials left by her senior fellow apprentice would be used up. The people of the Yinma cult would really make trouble for her. Ling Mansion. Ling Li slowly took the branch of the kurong tree and returned to the courtyard. Ling Mo and Ling Xian had been waiting there for a long time. Seeing Ling Li frowning, they looked at each other and immediately went forward to push the wheelchair. Young master, what is this? Ling Mo couldn't help but ask when he saw the thing in Ling Li's hand. He looked at it carefully and his expression changed immediately. Master, is it? That's right, this is the branch of the kurong tree. Ling Li replied and put the branch on the table. He was shocked. The 9 silver needles that were inserted in his waist immediately flew out and nailed to the wall. Hiss, standing up reluctantly, Ling Li took a light breath. His legs were so numb. It felt so good. Master, your cultivation is very high now. You don't need to rely on acupuncture to maintain the illusion. Why do you ask for trouble? Ling Mo held back his laughter and couldn't help but persuade him. Before Ling Li reached the inborn realm, he used acupuncture to cut off the tendons and vessels, which made those doctors think that his legs were really disabled. It was convenient to use acupuncture, but if it lasted for more than 7 days, his legs would really be disabled. Now Ling Li's cultivation reached the peak of the inborn realm. Although he wouldn't be disabled because of the 9 needles, the numbness in his legs caused by the obstruction of tendons and vessels was inevitable. He tried to stand up for a while and ran the genuine energy. The numbness faded quickly. Ling Li shook his head and said, Caution is the parent of safety. I still have to do what I should do. The reward of this year's autumn hunting contest is this thing. Second brother Ling won the first prize, so I asked for it. Ling Xian was surprised. She frowned and said, So coincidental. Is it possible that the Dongfang family deliberately sounds us out? I have thought about it. But if the kurong tree is exposed. Ling Li took a deep breath and said with cold eyes, then the cult needs to be cleaned. Ling Xian and Ling Mo were shocked. The last time the Yinma cult was cleaned was when Ling Li took over the cult. And Ling Qinglan, Ling Xian, go and find out what he is up to. Ling Qinglan said. Ling Xian saluted and said, Yes, master. At the same time, Ling Qinglan and Ling Ping came to Ling Ping's yard together. They looked at each other and laughed at the same time. They were very happy. If you survive a disaster, you will have good fortune later. Ling Ping patted Ling Qinglan's thin shoulder heavily and called him like Ling Li. He said, Brother Lan, don't worry. Go and see Mr. Li. He must have a way to cure you. Ling Qinglan didn't have much hope in his heart, but he still smiled and said, Thank you, second brother. It was easy to see the true feelings at the moment of life and death. Although Ling Qinglan was good to his grandmother and mother, he didn't know his true feelings. Ling Li had little contact with Ling Qinglan. His impression of Ling Qinglan was just a dull and weak cousin who was not very good. But today's experience obviously made him see Ling Qinglan clearly. He knew that Ling Qinglan was really a good brother who deserved to entrust his life. By the way, take these things. Ling Ping suddenly thought of something and gave Hung Yuan's sword and the booklet to Ling Qinglan. He said, "If Mr. Li didn't help me this time, I couldn't get the first prize. You give these two things to Mr. Li." The Ling family was upright all their lives. They didn't want to take advantage of others. Ling Ping's action was also expected by Ling Qinglan. He smiled and put away the two things. He didn't see what was in the booklet either. He said, "Second brother, I will take them." "Good. You are tired today. Why don't you have a rest here?" Ling Ping proposed. Ling Qinglan remembered that he didn't care about Su Qingtan for 3 days. He quickly waved his hand and said, "No, I still have a lot of things to deal with in the Supreme Judiciary. I have to go back quickly. I will come to stay for a while another day. In this case, I won't keep you." Ling Ping nodded and looked at the direction where Ling Qinglan left quickly. Ling Qinglan didn't talk to Brother Li. He asked Ling Ping to say, "Sorry," to Brother Li before. He couldn't help but scratch his head and said to himself, when did the two silly boys quarrel? Ling Qinglan didn't go to Ling Li's yard because he didn't dare. Su Qingtan's current state was like a broken porcelain. He depended on the elixir given by Mr. Li to maintain his state. If Ling Li saw something, he was not sure whether Ling Li would kill Su Qingtan with a sword in a rage. After hurrying back to the Supreme Judiciary, Ling Qinglan checked the traces of the tactical matrix left. He found that no one had touched it. Su Qingtan was still in meditation, but the ice in the adytum had partly melted. Ling Qinglan rearranged the adytum with the ice toxin. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He changed into clean clothes and found the bloody thin paper in the dirty clothes. He burned it to ashes. A faint expectation flashed in his eyes. If he could survive, who would want to die? Ling Qinglan didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, he disguised himself with a pair of dark circles and went to the address written on the thin paper alone. There were few pedestrians in the morning. Occasionally, he could see 1 or 2 pedestrians. When he walked to the alley on the thin paper, he couldn't see anyone. It was not even 5:00 in the morning. It was really too early. Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly. Suddenly, he saw a high-rise building protruding from the bungalow. The Linli building. There was also the Linli building in Yunjing City. Ling Qinglan was surprised. The Tianya house didn't find this place because the alley here was too remote. In addition, the Linli building didn't deliberately publicize it. It was far less famous than in Qinghe province. Standing at the door of the Linli building, Ling Qinglan hesitated for a moment and knocked on the door. Unexpectedly, the door was opened with a squeak. An ordinary waiter opened the door. Ling Qinglan didn't see any trace of disguise. It seemed that the Linli building in Yunjing City was different from the one in Qinghe town. At least this waiter didn't really belong to the Linli building. "Guest, come in. The shopkeeper has told you. There will be a guest coming this morning. You can go directly to the top floor." "Thank you." Ling Qinglan nodded and thanked. The waiter was immediately flattered. It was strange that a child dressed so luxuriously would thank him, a lowly person. On the way upstairs, Ling Qinglan didn't see anyone. But it was not the business time now. It was normal that there was no one. Looking around, he immediately saw the extremely eye-catching wooden sign for wine. The price on it made him inwardly suck in a breath of cold air. The wine not only increased in price, but also greatly. A bottle of wine cost 100,000 taels. No matter how much of a wine lover he was, he wouldn't buy it, right? Even if he had money, he wouldn't spend it like this. When he went up to the top floor, Ling Qinglan still saw the pavilion with the 4 windows open. The layout was exactly the same as that in Qinghe province. In the early morning, the cold wind was blowing. The cold poison in Ling Qinglan's body was affected. He looked weak and pale. But at this time, a pot of wine suddenly appeared in front of him. The voice of Mr. Li sounded at the right time. Drink it. Ling Qinglan looked up and found that Su Li appeared at the table. At this moment, his impression of Su Li was different. The first time they met in Qinghe province, he was frightened and mysterious. The second time they met, in the Supreme Judiciary, Mr. Li was more mysterious and profound in his mind. The third time, in the Northwest hunting ground, Mr. Li appeared out of nowhere and killed everything. While he admired Mr. Li, he also had a sense of closeness to Mr. Li. It seemed that the mysterious Mr. Li was not a mysterious guest who looked on indifferently, but he was vaguely paying attention to them and helping them. With a smile, Ling Qinglan raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He didn't worry about whether the wine was poisonous or not. But the spiciness of the wine was far beyond his imagination, and he immediately coughed violently. Ha ha ha, Su Li's hearty laughter echoed in the pavilion. Ling Qinglan coughed and smiled embarrassedly. He really lost face in front of Mr. Li. What? Soon, he found that when the wine entered his stomach, a warm feeling rose and suppressed the cold poison in his body. In terms of speed, it was not much slower than the elixirs he took. The wine had such an effect. Ling Qinglan was amazed in his heart. Su Li's teasing voice came to his ears. This wine is the original pulp of the Liehua spirits. Its value is more than 50,000 taels. By the way, are you going to stand and chat with me all the time? Ling Qinglan suddenly woke up and sat a little cautiously opposite Su Li. He had been the deputy hierarch of the Yinma cult for nearly 10 years, but at this moment, he felt restrained in front of Su Li. Mr. Li, please accept these two things. Ling Qinglan took out the Hongyuan sword and the ancient booklet and put them on the table. Second brother Ling and I both think that these two things should belong to Mr. Li. As for the branch of the dead tree, it was taken by the hierarch. Please forgive us, Mr. Li, it doesn't matter. Give me your hand. I'll see how many days you can live. Su Li didn't seem to care. She knocked on the table. Ling Qinglan stretched out his wrist obediently. He couldn't be more obedient. Even in front of Ling Li, he never showed such a well-behaved expression. Chapter 184. In the quiet attic, the more Su Li diagnosed, the more she frowned. Finally, she couldn't help but laugh angrily. Well, Lord Ling, you really don't care about your life. Now your body depends on the elixir I gave you. When the efficacy of the elixir disappears, I'm afraid that you will immediately vomit blood and die. Ling Qinglan scratched his head embarrassedly. He was ready to die at any time. At this moment, when he heard Su Li's words, he was not flustered. Instead, he smiled and said, Mr. Li, you have foreseen this, so you specially arranged the waiter to wait for me. Su Li stared at Ling Qinglan angrily. She pointed at the major acupoints all over Ling Qinglan's body with her fingers. She grasped the air with her 5 fingers. Wood starlight immediately penetrated into Ling Qinglan's body from the acupoints. The amount of starlight was several times more than that she treated Xiao Meng last time. The thread-like wood starlight seemed to be far different from the one used to treat Xiao Meng that day. Ling Qinglan did not recognize it. At this moment, he was shocked by the earth-shaking changes in his body. When his body encountered the green energy, it was like a good rain after a long drought. After the baptism of the green energy, his internal organs which had been eroded by the cold poison for a long time were immediately refreshed and revitalized. He could feel that his body recovered to the strong period at a very fast speed. The loss caused by the abuse of the cold poison was actually made up at once. At this moment, Su Li shouted softly, "Open your mouth." Ling Qinglan immediately opened his mouth. A pitch-black elixir went into his body along his throat. Then a strange itch began to spread from his throat. "It's so itchy." Ling Qinglan, who had endured the cold poison for many years, couldn't help but groan because of the strange itch. He couldn't help but open his clothes and grab the elixir that was getting deeper and deeper. Ling Qinglan was stunned by what he saw. The elixir in his abdomen was reflected on the surface of his skin and became a black spot. It was radiating along the tendons and vessels. In the blink of an eye, his hands and legs were covered with strange black lines. The strange itch spread to the bone marrow of his body. Ah 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 ah. The surging strange itch was like thousands of ants gnawing his bones. Ling Qinglan rolled from the stool to the ground in embarrassment. He curled up into a ball and kept groaning. What is this elixir? Seeing Ling Qinglan's bloodshot eyes, Su Li sighed and said, the antidote of the Li Jue pill. Ling Qinglan's eyes widened in shock. The separation pill actually had an antidote. He wanted to ask more questions, but he soon discovered that not only could he not speak, but he also could not even scratch his itch. His entire body was completely paralyzed. It was the effect of the black line. When Ling Qinglan thought of this, he could only divert his attention to distract himself from the pain. Fortunately, at this time, Su Li said again, the effect of separation of unconventional elixir is amazing. No matter how serious the injury is or how powerful the poison is, it can keep him alive for 100 days. But after 100 days, he will definitely die. There was no cure. Ling Qinglan, this is what you heard, right? Ling Qinglan's eyes were full of affirmation. He heard the rumor, so he took the elixir with the determination to die. Su Li shook her head and laughed. Do you know what is used to refine the Li Jue pill? Where did it come from? Why does such an amazing elixir flow into the secular world? Ling Qinglan was suffering hell-like torture at the moment, but Su Li's words were really attractive. He forced himself to continue listening with curiosity. Let me tell you, the separation pill. The Li Jue pill is refined from living people. The living people are burned to death by fire, and then their desperate hearts are taken. There are a total of 49 hearts and they are refined into a blood-red elixir. Besides, there is nothing else. Ling Qinglan's pupils shrank instantly. That was to say, what he ate was not an elixir, but human flesh. He immediately had a feeling of nausea, but now his whole body was imprisoned, so he couldn't do it. At this moment, Su Li continued to say, the refining method is a secret. Except for the elders of the Lianshi cult who refine corpse puppets for fun, no one else knows it. Those who have taken the Li Jue pill can indeed exchange for a period of time, but the specific number of days depends on the person. Do you want to live for 100 days? It's a fool's talk. Seeing that, Ms. Li didn't forget to attack him at this time, Ling Qinglan couldn't help but smile bitterly. He didn't know whether Su Li's words really had the effect of distracting his attention. He seemed to feel that the strange itch in his body seemed to be a little weaker. It was not as challenging his nerve limit as before. Those who take the Li Jue pill will usually be marked by the Lianshi cult in their bodies. They know that when you die, your body will immediately be taken back by the Lianshi cult and made into corpse puppets. Su Li's smile was a little creepy, and her words made Ling Qinglan's scalp numb. She said, because the Li Jue pill has another name, which is the treasure corpse pill. Those who take the Li Jue pill have a great chance to refine rarer corpse puppets after refining, which is the foundation of the Lianshi cult. Ling Qinglan retched. He had never felt so disgusted. He was actually schemed by the Lianshi cult from the beginning to the end. Although the Yinma cult was so powerful that it was no less than the Hehuan sect and the Lianshi cult, its foundation was still far behind. Well, can I speak with my mouth? Ling Qinglan suddenly found it and said with surprise. Su Li also smiled and said, it seems that the person who gave you the Li Jue pill is not a particularly powerful elder of the Lianshi cult. Otherwise, the mark will not be so easy to eliminate. In the future, you should remember not to take the elixir given by strangers. Ling Qinglan was ashamed and bowed his head, I will remember. He thought that the elder was a hermit, but it turned out that the elder took a fancy to his physical body. At this time, he suddenly felt that the top of his head was gently touched by Su Li, and then he heard Su Li said, the mark has dissipated. The people of the Lianshi cult can't control you, but your abnormality will definitely attract their attention. You should be careful recently. Then enjoy the detoxification process. Mr. Li, don't worry. This matter will not affect you. The Yinma cult is not a soft persimmon that can be pinched by others. Ling Qinglan said in a low voice, and then he realized the second half of Su Li's words. Detoxification? His poison hadn't been detoxified yet? Before he responded, Ling Qinglan felt a sharp pain suddenly spread from the bottom of his heart, and soon he couldn't speak because of the pain. When did I say that your poison has been detoxified? Su Li pressed Ling Qinglan's acupuncture point with one hand, so that he couldn't move. She said, Li Jue pill is a kind of corpse poison, which is extremely difficult to deal with. You have swallowed the Li Jue pill for more than 10 days. The corpse poison has penetrated deep into the bone marrow. It is not easy to remove all of it. After explaining, Su Li sighed and said, the paralysis can only make you endure the extreme itch. If you want to endure the real outbreak, you still have to rely on your own will. In order not to let you bite off your tongue, I pressed your acupuncture point. Ling Qinglan, the pain is actually much easier to endure than the extreme itch. I will come to refresh you every 2 hours. You must not fall asleep. In order to detoxify you, I have lost most of my wealth, and I can't afford the second antidote. If you really want to live, stick to it. Hearing the last sentence, Ling Qinglan's eyes showed unprecedented firmness. He was like a drowning man who suddenly saw a rope after a long time. Even if it was a fragile straw rope, he would not hesitate to grasp it. Live. He had been longing for these 2 words for a long time. Seeing Ling Qinglan's eyes, Su Li finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was not sure how strong Ling Qinglan's will to live was. Fortunately, this guy seemed to have seen hope, and there was a great chance that he could survive the torture of this day and night. After that, Su Li came to feed Ling Qinglan an elixir to nourish his mind every 2 hours, so that Ling Qinglan wouldn't have a nervous breakdown. But Ling Qinglan still felt that every minute and second was very difficult. The boundless pain made him numb, but he had to keep the pain clear so that he wouldn't fall asleep. It was just a day and a night, but in Ling Qinglan's cognition, it seemed that he had spent tens of thousands of years. When the morning light appeared on the horizon the next day, the pain all over his body faded like the tide. He relaxed and lay flat on the ground, watching the rising sun in the sky. He never felt that the morning sun could be so beautiful and spectacular. Standing up reluctantly, Ling Qinglan looked at his wrinkled clothes and a thick layer of sweat on the ground. He smiled bitterly for a moment, and finally relaxed. The haze brought by the Li Jue pill finally passed. If he saw the old man again in the future, he would definitely use the power of the Shalu cult to torture the old man half to death. Tap 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 tap, familiar footsteps came from behind. Ling Qinglan turned around and saw Su Li. There was a trace of exhaustion on her face. He couldn't help but feel ashamed. He quickly stepped forward and bowed deeply, Ms. Li, I can't repay you this time. If you need any help in the future, I'm at your disposal. Su Li tilted her head and smiled. She said meaningfully, well, I accept your promise. Now you have recovered to the state before you took the Li Jue pill, and your physical condition is good. Now go back to your hierarch. He should have a way to solve the cold poison now. Ling Qinglan remembered that Su Li only helped him solve the sequela of the Li Jue pill, and the cold poison also threatened his life. But he still didn't understand what Su Li said. Ling Li has a way to deal with the cold poison. Ling Qinglan didn't believe it, but what Su Li said didn't seem to be false. If I guess right, that branch is the rare treasure in the fire, the branch of the kurong tree. This thing can naturally restrain the cold poison. If it is used properly, the cold poison in your body will not be a big problem. Su Li said with a teasing smile, and I also heard that your hierarch and the little girl of the Su family have an agreement. As long as you find the branch of the kurong tree, the little girl of the Su family will cure you. You can rest assured. Ling Qinglan was stunned for a long time when he heard that. It turned out that the branch that Ling Li had been looking for was the treasure to dispel the cold poison for him. Why did Ling Li do things in secret like him? If Ling Li had said it earlier, how could he swallow such a terrible elixir as the Lijue pill? For a moment, Ling Qinglan was angry and amused, but he was more ashamed. During this time, he misunderstood Ling Li. He clearly knew that Ling Li was not a selfish person, and it was impossible for him to take advantage of his dying body. But at that time, he was blinded by the heavy shadow, and he didn't see it clearly. So, he made a stupid thing. Suddenly, he thought of something and hesitated to say, "Master, if I detoxify the cold poison, what about Su Qingtan?" Su Li smiled when she heard that. If Ling Qinglan didn't ask this question, she wouldn't cure him. Don't worry. I will explain the rest to the little girl Su Li. Anyway, I am her kindred spirit and a fellow from the same hometown. She will listen to my advice. Hearing Su Li's guarantee, Ling Qinglan finally put down the burden completely. After thanking her several times, he bought 2 pots of first-class Liehua spirits and left the Linli building with satisfaction. He completely forgot that he would never buy wine when he just entered the Linli building. It was a sunny day again. Ling Qinglan raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. The spiciness went into his throat. He laughed and stepped away from the remote alley. After just 1 day and 1 night, the trajectory of his fate had been completely different. Xian Jingzhou, who looked greedy, poked his head out of the Zhouyue winery and couldn't help licking his lips. Chapter 185. In the study of the Ling mansion, Ling Imo suddenly came in and reported, "Master, Ling Qinglan is here." Ling Li stopped writing and threw the file aside. He raised his eyebrows and said angrily, "I just sent Ling Xian to investigate him, and this guy comes to me. Does he want to ruin my plan?" Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan pushed the door and came in with a smile on his face, which was quite different from the usual smile that kept people thousands of miles away. Ling Li was slightly stunned. Ling Qinglan seemed to be different. But he couldn't tell what was different. Ling Qinglan sat down in front of Ling Li. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "I'm sorry." Ling Li felt more strange and said with a faint smile, "It's not in line with your character to apologize immediately. What have you done recently? Tell me." Ling Qinglan appeared here, which meant that he was ready to show his cards. Hearing that, Ling Qinglan took a deep breath as expected. Every word he said was earth-shattering. "I gave Su Qingtan Qiyu Xiangong." What? Ling Imo was guarding at the door. He was slightly shocked and looked at Ling Qinglan with an unbelievable look. Did he want Su Qingtan to die? Ling Li tightened his lips and looked gloomy. "Do you know that ordinary people will die if they practice it?" Even Ling Imo couldn't control himself in those years. "I forced him to lose 3 years of hard practice for no reason." Ling Li took a deep breath and suppressed his anger. He asked, "How long has Su Qingtan practiced?" He didn't care about other people's lives, but Su Qingtan. Su Li's eldest brother. If Su Qingtan died, he didn't know what the eccentric girl would do. Ling Qinglan heard the question and smiled. More than 13 days. Su Qingtan has reached the acquired 7th hurdle and is clear-minded. Hearing that, Ling Li's anger suddenly stagnated. 13 days. He reached the acquired 7th hurdle from no cultivation. That was to say, Su Qingtan didn't lose his mind. Instead, he passed the most dangerous stage safely. Ling Li didn't understand. He had seen Su Qingtan before. Except for his handsome face, his route was ordinary. There was nothing special about him. How could such a person have a fate with Qiyu Xiangong? He didn't believe it. At this moment, Ling Qinglan suddenly said the reason in one breath. "I used the ice poison to help him suppress it." Every minute and second, he was extremely calm and had no desire. Qiyu Xiangong practiced to the second inborn hurdle of the Qiyu Xiangong. It was a peerless martial art without drawbacks. From now on, our sect will have another peerless expert. Crash. Ling Li was shocked and angry. He suddenly stood up and grabbed Ling Qinglan's wrist. The files on the table were scattered on the ground. He roared in a low voice, "Are you crazy? I worked so hard to help you break through to the Xiantian realm and suppress the cold poison, but you can't wait to die." Ling Li was like a furious king at the moment. His momentum rolled back in the room and made his sleeves flutter. But Ling Qinglan grinned. It was said that Ling Li was cold-blooded and selfish. He valued everything, including people, in Jianghu. As for Ling Li, he tried his best to pretend to be heartless. But no matter how he pretended, he couldn't deceive everyone, just like now. Thump, 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 Ling Li was stunned when he felt the strong pulse in his hand. It was not like the tendons and vessels eroded by the cold poison at all. "Are you kidding me?" Ling Li raised his eyebrows and calmed down instantly. He sat back in the wheelchair and crossed his hands. He said, "I can see that you are deliberately looking for trouble today. Go on." Ling Qinglan sat upright and said seriously, "What I said today is true. Su Qingtan is still in the Supreme Judiciary. In order to help him, I took the Li Jue pill." Ling Li clenched his hands tightly, but he didn't say much this time. He could see that Ling Qinglan hadn't finished his words. No matter how complicated his heart was now, he was going to settle the score with Ling Qinglan at the end. Ling Mo's eyes darkened slightly. The name of the Li Jue pill could tell that it was not a good elixir. The Li Jue pill can keep you alive for 100 days. But you will die after 100 days. I exchanged this elixir for enough time to arrange a perfect practice environment for Su Qingtan. But man proposes, God disposes. The effect of the Li Jue pill only lasted for 13 days. Ling Li loosened his hands and curled his lips. It had been more than 13 days today, but this guy was still alive. Could it be that the Li Jue pill is fake? Ling Mo couldn't help but frown and ask. If a fake medicine that would not kill people could extend their lives for 13 days without sequelae, it was a miraculous medicine. No. The Li Jue pill is real. Ling Qinglan thought of the scene on the hunting ground that day. He was afraid and said, "After taking the Li Jue pill, I tried not to fight with others. But on the third day of the autumn hunting, the pear blossom Yinyang fan was destroyed." Destroyed? Ling Li's pupils shrank slightly. No wonder he didn't come here with the fan today. The life-saving weapon was destroyed. What on earth did Ling Qinglan experience in the hunting ground? 8 seniors of the inborn realm set up a tactical matrix to kill us. Ling Qinglan's tone became cold and severe. He said, "Second brother Ling and I were not even qualified to die together. The level of the trap matrix was far beyond my ability. I could only exchange the yin-yang fan for 10 minutes. Finally, I detonated the needle base to help second brother Ling survive." But in the end, Ling Qinglan smiled bitterly and said, "Not to mention a way out, there was not even a crack in the tactical matrix. Second brother Ling and I could only wait for death." What happened then? It seemed that Ling Mo could imagine how desperate Ling Qinglan and Ling Ping were at that time. He couldn't help but ask nervously. Ling Li's eyes were full of coldness. The second brother didn't mention it to him. If Ling Qinglan didn't say it, he would have been kept in the dark. Later, a young man in plain clothes who seemed to be about the same age as Ling Li appeared. Ling Qinglan stared at Ling Li's surprised eyes and said word by word, "He broke the tactical matrix by himself and killed 3 people in a breath. The remaining 5 people fled in a panic, but they were all killed by him with a very strange skill of controlling things. We survived inexplicably." Ling Mo was gradually shocked. A young man who was about the same age as his master killed 8 seniors of the inborn realm as easily as cutting melons and vegetables. There was someone who could compete with his master in this world? Who is he? Ling Li frowned and various thoughts appeared in his mind. He said, according to what you said, the Ling family owes that young man 2 lives. It is difficult to pay off this kindness. If he wants to repay the kindness, I know what you want to say. Listen to me first. Ling Qinglan interrupted Ling Li and continued, I have seen that young man before. He called himself Mr. Li. His whereabouts were erratic. Few people know his real face. Even now, I don't know whether what I saw was his real face. Then Ling Qinglan told Ling Li that he went to the Lin Li building to keep the appointment. Ling Li became more silent. Was there really a person in the world who did things without asking for repayment? He was very doubtful, but he couldn't refute what Ling Qinglan said. Ling Qinglan clearly knew the details of all of them and the situation in Yunjing. He saved the Ling family from danger continuously and deliberately left the beast ears to help second brother Ling win the first prize. But he never stood up to ask for anything. This person was really weird. He would never think that the so-called Mr. Li and Su Li would be the same person. The young man that Ling Qinglan said made him preconceived. He had already determined that Mr. Li was a mysterious peer whose cultivation and temperament were unfathomable. Mr. Li also said that there was an agreement between you and Su Li. When Ling Qinglan said this, he looked a little ashamed. He said, it's my fault. If I can firmly believe in you, I won't eat the Li Jue pill. No, it's my fault. Ling Li said in a low voice. His tone was sincere and complicated. He said, you don't need to say more. If I had made it clear earlier, the misunderstanding would not have happened. Ling Qinglan heard it and smiled gently. He said, that's good. You have your fault, and I have mine. Since the matter has passed, it's better to let it go. After all, I have to continue to be a Qinghu. Hierarch and deputy hierarch can't have a conflict. Seeing that Ling Qinglan said this gracefully, the last discomfort in Ling Li's heart was completely erased. He couldn't help but laugh and scold, you are a good person. How can I, the hierarch, feel ashamed? Ha ha ha, there was a burst of cheerful laughter in the room. After laughing, Ling Li suddenly thought of something and said strangely, you said that Mr. Li asked me to find Su Li to fulfill the promise? Ling Qinglan was slightly stunned. He said, yes, the Kurong tree has been obtained. Is it? Ling Li scratched his head and said, does he have any misunderstanding about the agreement between me and Su Li? What? Ling Qinglan was confused. Ling Mo interrupted at this moment, the agreement between you and Su Li is that you must get the full moon and heartstrings and the branch of the Kurong tree. Then Su Li will promise to cure you. Ling Qinglan was completely dumbfounded when he heard it. It turned out that even Ling Li's ambition for the full moon and heartstrings was also because of the agreement with Su Li. But do you want to say that Su Li looks kind-hearted and innocent? She won't make such a request at all. Ling Li said quietly and gnashed his teeth. He said, don't be deceived by her weak appearance. In fact, she is not only ruthless, but also never soft-hearted when she cheats people. Ling Qinglan was really dumbfounded when he heard it. He had met Su Li many times, especially in the carriage. Su Li's performance could be said to be the standard dream of all men in the world. How could she be cruel and merciless, as Ling Li said? But Ling Li said so. It could only be said that Su Li's acting skills were far beyond his ability to see through. When he thought that he needed Su Li to detoxify the cold poison in his body, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Chapter 186. Seeing Ling Li's action, Ling Qinglan was more confused. Ling Li was going to suffer a loss. Why did he show an impatient look? Ling Qinglan raised his eyebrows and went out. He grabbed Ling Mo, who was about to leave, and asked in a low voice, what is the relationship between Ling Li and Su Li? I don't know. Ling Mo answered expressionlessly. Ling Qinglan was instantly disappointed. Unexpectedly, Ling Mo turned around and walked a few steps. Then he came back and whispered, "But Miss Su saved my life and my master's life. Master owes Miss Su more." "I see." Ling Qinglan responded meaningfully. He finally understood why Ling Li didn't think of revenge even though he was deceived by Su Li. "Ling Mo, hurry up." An angry voice came from the room. Ling Mo's face trembled. He quickly left, but there was a smile on his face. The affiliated school of the National Academy. Su Li played the sound acquaintance, poisonous insect in her hand. She held her chin with her left hand and was in a daze. She used up most of the rare medicinal materials in the underground adytum to refine the antidote of the Lijue pill. The medicinal materials reserve was greatly damaged. She didn't know when she could collect so many precious medicines again. She had to use them sparingly in the future. During this time, her cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. She relied on the complete medicinal materials left by her senior fellow apprentice. The auxiliary medicines she refined were all high-grade. In just a few months, she had reached the inborn 7th hurdle. Although it was far from the extreme 9th hurdle of the inborn hurdle. But with the help of the AO sword skills, her explosive power was no less than that of the inborn 9th hurdle. The only drawback was that if she used the AO sword skills, her endurance was too poor. She could only launch the attack that killed the 8 inborn hurdles 3 times with the support of genuine energy. But even so, Su Li was very satisfied. Because the fighting capacity of the inborn 9th hurdle was enough for her to stand firm in Yunjing City. Swish! At this moment, Su Li's expression suddenly changed slightly. Immediately, a black shadow flashed into the room. Su Li saw that it was a middle-aged man with an ordinary face, but his cultivation reached the inborn hurdle. When the middle-aged man saw Su Li, he knelt on the ground and respectfully presented an invitation. Su Li looked at his dress, and a faint golden light flashed in her eyes. They were from the Slaughter Tower. The assassins of the Shalading Tower looked inconspicuous on the surface, making it difficult for others to identify them. However, there was one thing that was easy to identify. Her husband in her previous life had once said that every assassin of the Shalading Tower would have an inconspicuous mark on their ears, which could only be seen by the Shalading Tower's unique eye sorcery. Thinking of this, Su Li stretched out her hand, and the invitation fell into her hand. Without any nonsense, the middle-aged man immediately turned into a black shadow and disappeared in the room. To be on the safe side, Su Li came to the underground adytum and opened the envelope. A map and a token fell out. She opened the map and found that there were marks on it. This was the whole picture of Yunjing City, and the marked place was a whole street. Su Li raised her eyebrows. Didn't he ask her to treat Ling Qinglan? What was he trying to do? Turning to the back of the map, she finally saw Ling Li's handwriting. "I have something to discuss with you. See you on the street in the evening." Su Li burned the letter into ashes. There was light in her eyes. She wanted to see what Ling Li was going to do this time. In the twinkling of an eye, the sun went down. The red clouds in the west in the evening were like a fire burning through half of the sky, gilding people with a layer of gold. Su Li's plain white dress turned golden red. She walked slowly on the nameless street. Her long hair was like a golden waterfall, which made her quite charming. This was a street that looked ordinary. The evening market was noisy, and there were ordinary people coming and going. Among them, there was a teenager with a jade bone mask. He stood beside the street vendor and looked at Su Li quietly. He had been waiting for her for a long time. Looking through the crowd, Su Li smiled. She thought of the time when she saw Ling Li for the first time in her life. However, even if he was destined to be with her, what could he do? Su Li's smile faded a little. She walked to Ling Li and said in a flat voice, "Hierarch, aren't you afraid of being discovered by the people of Dahan country?" He grinned under the jade bone mask and said calmly, "Miss Su, do you know where this place is?" Su Li raised her eyebrows and replied without showing weakness, I'd like to hear the details. So, the teenager with the jade bone mask suddenly grabbed Su Li's hand. In the astonished eyes of the pedestrians around, they suddenly broke into the turbulent crowd. They became more eye-catching. When their skin touched, Su Li's fingertips trembled slightly. She was angry and said unbelievably, Are you crazy? Ling Li didn't panic. Instead, he laughed recklessly and asked, Miss Su, do you know the meaning of the so-called Great Hermit in the city? What? Before she thought carefully, Su Li had been pulled to the busiest middle of the street in the blink of an eye. There were acrobats, tea vendors, and sugar figurines. Ling Li took a sugar figurine from the vendor and sent it to Su Li. Su Li frowned and didn't ask. Then she heard the craftsman suddenly stood up and saluted to Ling Li, hierarch. Then, the craftsman began to sell sugar figurines, as if the greeting just now was just an ordinary greeting. Then, the butcher put down the knife in his hand and laughed, hierarch. The acrobat jumped down from the high place and saluted respectfully with the monkey in his hand. Hierarch. The scholars and booksellers who passed by the bookstall put down the books in their hands at the same time and turned around to salute. Hierarch. Even the passers-by on the roadside would stop immediately and turn back to say, hierarch. 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 The face of the teenager with the jade bone mask showed an evil smile. You ask me whether I am afraid or not? Have you ever seen a master who goes home afraid? This place, is this sect master's territory. The maple leaves on both sides of the street fell like red butterflies. Su Li took a deep breath and almost forgot to breathe at this moment. At this time, Ling Li exuded a high spirit, which was the dazzling light she had never seen before. Following Ling Li to the deepest mansion in the street, Su Li calmed down and various thoughts came to her mind. Moyin, the headquarters of the Yinma cult, was actually hidden in a street in Yunjing City. She had heard that the headquarters of the Yinma cult was called Moyin in her previous life. But at that time, the Yinma cult had been destroyed and the headquarters was nowhere to be found. An inborn senior who could really live like an ordinary person. There were a large number of seniors in the headquarters of the Yinma cult who practiced the secular world doctrine. Their strength could not be underestimated. Although the secular world doctrine was difficult, if one had the talent, his Xiangong would advance very quickly. For example, Xian Jingzhou and his wife were less than 40 years old, but they both reached the highest realm of the inborn realm. However, the core of the Yinma cult turned out to be a group of highly principled seniors of the secular world doctrine. It was really surprising. While thinking, Ling Li had taken off his mask and poured a cup of tea for Su Li. Miss Su, please have some tea. Ling Li sat opposite to Su Li with his right hand. He was perturbed and didn't know what to say for a while. After all, the agreement between him and Su Li was very clear. Now he didn't get the full moon and heartstrings, but he wanted Su Li to treat Ling Qinglan first. It was really against the rules. At this time, Su Li suddenly said, I have heard the details from Mr. Li. Since Ling Qinglan's body can't support the day of the auction, and the branch of the kurong tree has been obtained, I reluctantly detoxify Ling Qinglan first, but, Ling Li was relieved when he heard the words. Then he was worried when he heard the word, but. He knew that Su Li was not the one who would suffer losses at all. But what? Ling Qinglan couldn't help walking out of the inner room and asked in a deep voice, Miss Su, I am the one who was poisoned. If you want to embarrass me, you can embarrass me. Su Li tilted her head and looked at Ling Qinglan. She stared at him and said, You practiced such a strange practice method for my eldest brother. I haven't punished you yet. Do you want to help others? Ling Qinglan's face suddenly turned green. Was the relationship between Su Li and Mr. Li so close? She even told him about Su Qingtan. But it was normal. If she didn't say it, there was no other reason to leave the ice poison for Su Qingtan to suppress the devil in his heart. After all, the ice poison was harmful. It could only restrain the Qiyu Xiangong, which was also an evil martial art. Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan had to leave silently. He didn't want to make trouble for Ling Li. Ling Li asked with a black face, "What do you want this time?" He didn't hesitate to expose the headquarters in front of her and almost didn't treat her as an outsider. Why did she still speak coldly to him and ignore him? Did she think that he was angry because he mistook her for Ling Shui? Or last time, he accidentally kissed her? Hierarch, do you remember that you owed me a favor on the way to the hunting ground a few days ago? Su Li smiled like a little fox and said, "I know that you have a big family and a big business. You can't give me many things in return at once. So, you should remember that you owe me 2 favors now. At a certain time in the future, you should do 2 things for me unconditionally on the premise of not violating the doctrine of the Yinma cult. As long as you agree, I will immediately cure Ling Qinglan." It was this request again. Ling Li couldn't think of a reason to refute, but the scope of Su Li's request was too wide. It always made him feel that Su Li was planning something unspeakable. But now, it was more important to detoxify Ling Qinglan. "Miss Su, do you mean it?" "Of course." "Well, deal. I owe Miss Su Li 2 requests in my life. If you don't make a request, I will remember it and never forget it." An hour later, Ling Li looked at Su Li, who held the ice crystal branch with a gloomy face. He couldn't believe it and said, "That's it?" From the beginning to the end, Ling Li only saw Su Li take the branch of the kurong tree and put it in the position of Ling Qinglan's pubic region. Then, there was no then. He felt that he suffered a great loss in doing business. If he had known that it was so easy to detoxify Ling Qinglan's cold poison, he wouldn't have invited Su Li to suffer a great loss. Ling Qinglan, who was between them, had no time to care about Ling Li's feelings. An hour later, he watched as ice crystals formed little by little on the withered branches. His eyes gradually became moist and he felt his body becoming more and more relaxed. He could clearly feel that the cold poison that had troubled him for more than 10 years was leaving him at an extremely fast speed. "Dad! Mom! I can live again. With your blessings in heaven, I will find out the real murderer of the unsettled case that year. Although I just put the branch on Ling Qinglan's abdomen lightly, you can't do it because it is about skills and secret methods. It can't be done without the genuine medical knowledge." Su Li was full of nonsense, which made Ling Li feel better. In fact, the preparation for the treatment of the cold poison had been completed in the Linli building. The last step was the kurong tree branch. The energy and medicinal materials consumed from the beginning to the end were far beyond Ling Li's imagination. However, Su Li didn't say a word about it. Because in this life, she just wanted to stand in the dark and quietly watch Ling Li fulfill his wish. She didn't want to destroy the image of her husband in her heart. Even if she knew that she couldn't see the silly boy again, she didn't want him in this life, to become him in the previous life. Chapter 187. Su Li's expression remained unchanged, but Ling Li could clearly feel that her back suddenly became very sad. The sadness lasted for a moment and then disappeared, which made him think that it was an illusion. Hierarch Ling was confused. What was wrong with him? Why did he have blurred vision when he saw people? Ms. Li said that you can keep it and put it beside my eldest brother. Remember not to touch the ice crystal, or you will be frozen. This is the essence of the ice poison in your body for more than 10 years. Don't be careless. Su Li handed the ice crystal branch to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan took it carefully and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Miss Su. I will live up to Ms. Li's trust." Ling Qinglan wiped his tears. He was refreshed as if he had been reborn. There was a faint sound of porcelain breaking in his body. His cultivation had been suppressed by the ice poison for too long. Now the ice poison disappeared. What awaited him was the period of eruption of cultivation. After saying goodbye to Ling Li and Chu Lu, Su Li returned to the affiliated school of the National Academy. Mammy Li had prepared the dinner. After dinner, Su Li returned to the study and found that there was a file on the table. The mark on it was sent by Chu Lu. Su Li opened the seal and opened it. The file recorded Su Zipei's words and deeds every day. In recent days, Su Zipei was very close to many young masters of rich and powerful families. Someone taught her the means to communicate with the upper circle in Yunjing. She was a little famous, but it was just a flower name. Even a flower name is extremely great. Su Li felt strange. There were many girls from poor families who were more beautiful than Su Zipei in Yunjing, but few of them could really enter the attention of the young masters of rich and powerful families. Zhu Yan couldn't have such means and vision. The only possibility was that Su Zipei was helped by a senior. But Su Zipei herself had no value. Who would help her? Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly. Even Chu Lu couldn't find that person. It meant that the person's ability to hide was better than the intelligence system of the Hehuan sect. This was enough to arouse vigilance. The Baishou feast will be held in 2 days. Su Li crushed the file in her hand. Her eyes flickered. If Su Zipei really had a hidden purpose, she would definitely give herself away the day after tomorrow. Because of the 100 Beasts feast, the whole city celebrated together. During the autumn hunting meet, the young geniuses had shot and killed countless ferocious beasts. If their corpses were left to rot in the wilderness, how could they bear it? In the year of famine, ordinary people didn't have enough to eat. The so-called autumn hunting contest to celebrate the harvest resulted in a lot of waste. Wouldn't the Dahan country become a country of extravagance where wine and meat stink in the luxurious door and bones of frozen dead on the road? Thus, the 100 Beasts feast was held every year after the autumn hunting meet. The royal guards would collect the corpses of the beasts in the 3-day hunting ground and send them to the imperial kitchen to be cooked into delicacies. Then they would hold the Baishou feast in the largest Xinwu Square in Yunjing City in the name of the chief. All the residents of Yunjing City were qualified to get 1 or 2 kilograms of meat delicacies to taste. Even the passers-by who temporarily lived in Yunjing City had the opportunity to eat it. It was a real festival celebrated by the whole city. Because of this tradition, the common people in the city even named this day, Meat-Eating Day, such a simple and crude name. In the expectation of the common people, the day of the Baishou feast came quickly. Before dawn in the early morning, a large number of royal guards came to the Xinwu Square to maintain order. At this moment, the square was full of long tables, but the meat hadn't been served yet. The street outside the circle guarded by the royal guards was already crowded with common people who came to get meat. Although it was crowded, there was no chaos. The road had already been divided by the army. If anyone dared to cut the line, he would be immediately thrown to the back by the soldiers. Meat! Meat! Children with patched clothes played around their parents. Their cheerful laughter infected the common people around them. The Xinwu Square was full of warmth on this day. Gradually, the sun rose from the east. Once it was 7 in the morning, a large number of palace maids and eunuchs immediately carried out fragrant meats and placed them on the long tables. These meats were either roasted, boiled, stewed, or braised according to the quality of the meat. All of them looked, smelled, and looked delicious. The common people waiting outside drooled at the sight. After all the long tables were full, the commander of the royal guards finally shouted in the expectant eyes of the people, "In the first round, 1,000 people enter the field. There is a lot of game this year. Each person can get 3 kilograms of meat." As soon as he finished speaking, the soldiers let them in. Immediately thousands of people rushed into the square, and hundreds of scales were placed at the exit of the square. No one dared to cross the line and take more meat. In previous years, many people had their legs broken because they tried to escape with more meat. Considering the serious consequences, no one dared to snatch the meat. Everything seemed very harmonious. On the other side, Su Li also waited in a long line. She glanced at a large number of common people in the line, took a jade token from her arms and handed it to the soldier who checked. After seeing it, the soldier immediately let them in. Look, they are people of the National Academy. Are they students of the girls' martial arts school? It's so good to participate in the autumn hunting. Many people were talking about it. Standing outside the circle, they were full of envy. I will try my best to be admitted to the National Academy next year. No matter how much the people who participated in the autumn hunting had, they could enter the Baisho building, which was specially built for the Baisho feast. Although Su Li only got 2 pairs of animal ears, it was also a harvest. Putting away the jade token, Su Li bypassed the long tables in the square and stopped in front of a 7-story building. This was the Baisho building. On the first floor, there was a hubbub of voices. Su Li glanced around and didn't see any acquaintances. Then she sat at a table and entertained herself by eating. Although the cooks of the imperial kitchen were not as good as her, they were of different factions and had unique tastes. Su Li ate with relish and completely forgot that she could go to the top floor with her identity. For many young talents who entered the Baisho building, of course, they wouldn't forget the purpose of coming here because of meat. Most of the people on the first floor had no background. Otherwise, they could even go to the second floor. They formed groups and cliques, and from time to time, they looked at Su Li, who was eating and drinking with contempt. Naturally, no one on this floor knew Su Li. What's more, Su Li was eating and didn't look up at all. Su Li only ate happily. Suddenly, she stopped. She noticed that there was one more person beside her. Looking up, she saw Ling Li's face full of lecherous smile. He was a standard playboy. Su Li glanced at him expressionlessly, and then, continued to eat. Ling Li's face darkened. He was actually ignored. Immediately, he spoke like a playboy and said impolitely, "Hey. It's your honor that I come here. Don't you have any manners?" Su Li heard it and smiled. She raised her head and said politely, "Thank you so much, Child Ling. My identity is humble, and I really don't deserve to talk to you. Child Ling, you'd better go upstairs quickly." If it was a one-on-one meeting, this lass would definitely say, "I don't have time to chat with you right now. Go somewhere cool and stay." For a moment, Ling Li felt strong indignation in his heart. But before he said anything, he suddenly heard a crisp voice. "Second sister, you are here. It took me a while to find you. I heard that you hunted 2 rabbit ears in the hunting ground. It's really amazing." Su Zipei, who wore a blue luxurious dress, suddenly appeared. She held the arm of a playboy who walked unsteadily. She smiled sweetly, which really made her imitate the charm of a rich lady. Su Li raised her head and wiped her greasy fingertips. She smiled warmly and said, "It's you, third sister. I'm really surprised that you can come to the Baisho building." They hadn't seen each other for a long time. The second sister was not a virgin anymore. But she had some guesses when she got the file, so she was not too surprised. Her tone at this moment was like a spring breeze. It was not harsh at all. But when Su Zipei heard it, her face instantly turned livid. Su Li's words were different from those who pointed at her nose and laughed at her. "You can enter the Baisho building by sleeping with a man." She grasped the half-jade pendant on her waist with her left hand and quickly calmed down. She turned to look at Ling Li and retorted without showing weakness, "I forgot to tell you that I got the opportunity through hard work. But you are so insignificant. I don't believe that you can enter the Baisho building without the help of others. And of all the people you could find, sister, why did you choose a crippled young master with crippled legs? With sister's condition, could it be that you're only worthy of such trash?" Su Zipei tightened the arms of the young man next to her and sneered. She didn't see that the face of her male companion was green. Su Li covered her mouth and chuckled. She shook her head and said, "Child, I advise you to leave as soon as possible." The foppish young man shuddered and immediately shook off Su Zipei's hand. Then, Without saying a single word, he frantically ran away as if there was a man-eating creature chasing after him. The sudden change stunned Su Zipei. She was confused. Why did Child Wang run away? But at this moment, an insolent and wanton scolding suddenly sounded on the first floor. Ugly girl who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know who you are talking to? For a moment, all the people on the first floor focused on them. Su Zipei had never experienced such a scene. She was so scared that her face turned pale. But when she heard the words, ugly girl, she was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. She screamed and scolded, ugly? How am I ugly? You are a disabled person. Are you qualified to say that I am ugly? Wow, Su Zipei dared to scold Ling Li. The crowd burst into an uproar. After all, Su Zipei was a vulgar flower who disguised herself too much. When she was angry, she showed her true colors like a vixen on the street. Su Li stood aside and didn't know what to do. But her heart was cold. It was just the right time. Su Zipei could see more things when she quarreled with Ling Li. Good. Ling Li suddenly clapped his hands with a smile and said coldly, no one has mentioned the word, disabled, in front of me for many years. You mentioned it twice today. If it wasn't for your sister, I would break your legs and let you have a taste. The eyes of this person were so terrible. Su Zipei couldn't help but shiver. The voices of the crowd drowned her ears. Finally, she knew the identity of this person, but she would rather not know it. Where does this silly girl come from? How dare she provoke the first playboy in Yunjing City? According to Child Ling's tone, she seems to be Su Li's younger sister. I didn't expect that Su Li, a talented girl who is educated and polite, has such a rude younger sister. No matter how much Child Ling likes Su Li, there should be a limit. Today, Su Zipei provoked him. It's hard to say what will happen. Child Ling, the first playboy in Yunjing City. Su Zipei felt dizzy. The person she provoked turned out to be one of the people that the person warned her not to provoke. How could such a person appear on the first floor and happen to be next to Su Li? Ah ah ah. The voices of the crowd became louder and louder. Su Zipei was full of fear. She didn't know where she got the strength from. She ran out crazily and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Ha 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 ha. The crowd laughed, but Su Li couldn't laugh. Instead, she ran out with a worried face. Although the relationship between her and Su Zipei was not good at all, she still had to pretend. Ling Li looked at Su Li's disappearing figure and smiled evilly. He waved to Ling Emo at the door and said softly, the jade pendant on Su Zipei's waist is very extraordinary. Go and steal it. Ling Emo nodded. If the person who offended him was not punished at all, the gold-lettered name of the first playboy in Yunjing City would be ruined. Chapter 188. When Su Li returned to the Baisho building, she couldn't hear Ling Li's voice. He was probably found by his brother Ling Ping and pushed upstairs. Su Zipei made such a scene, so she lost interest in tasting delicious food and walked upstairs. Many people saw that she was not stopped by the royal guards on both sides of the stairs. They couldn't help but be stunned. It turned out that the status of the girl they mocked just now was far above them. At the same time, Su Zipei's footsteps were disorderly. She knocked over several long tables and spilled meat soup. She walked out of the Shenwu Square unconsciously. She suppressed the panic in her heart and barely recognized the direction. Then she ran to the place where she usually met the mysterious woman. She provoked the person she shouldn't provoke. Even her mother couldn't save her. She had to find a way. Today, the street outside the Shenwu Square in Yunjing City was extraordinarily cold. Su Zipei ran faster and faster as if hope was in front of her. She turned a corner, but at this moment, a sedan chair came from the corner. Su Zipei didn't stop in time. Bang! She bumped into the servant who was carrying the sedan chair. Ouch! Su Zipei fell on her back and fell on her back, causing the sedan chair to become unstable. The person inside the sedan chair opened the curtain and looked outside. It was a middle-aged man who looked like he was in his 30s. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not angry and had a noble air. He was definitely from an extraordinary family. Su Zipei cursed in her heart. Why was she so unlucky today? She not only offended the master of the Ling family, but also bumped into a noble lord on the way. She climbed up hurriedly. The middle-aged man immediately saw the jade pendant on her waist, which made his pupils shrink. He stopped in the air for a long time and didn't respond. Please forgive me for offending you, Lord. Su Zipei kowtowed several times. The middle-aged man's butler saw that his master didn't respond, so he waved his hand impatiently. Su Zipei was relieved and quickly got up and ran away. She was so happy that she didn't find that when she passed by the sedan chair, a black shadow flashed in front of her and the jade pendant on her waist suddenly disappeared. The middle-aged man came to his sense and immediately became furious. He shouted, "Turn around, quick! Stop that girl for me!" The housekeeper's expression changed greatly. He hadn't seen his master get angry for many years. He immediately used his body movement to grab Su Zipei's shoulder and threw her in front of the sedan chair. He apologized, "I misjudged your intention. I deserve to die." Pa! As soon as the middle-aged man got off the sedan chair, he gave the steward a slap and said angrily, "Who told you to be so rude? Quickly apologize to her." Yes, yes. The housekeeper didn't dare to refute, for fear of being slapped a few more times. He turned his head and apologized to Su Zipei, "Miss, I was rude just now. I'm really sorry." When the middle-aged man heard this, his expression softened. He couldn't help but turn around excitedly and look at the confused Su Zipei. But when he looked, Su Zipei's waist was empty. Where was the jade pendant? Illusion. The middle-aged man's hand froze in the air. It turned out to be an illusion. But the jade pendant was so real. Did he have so many dreams in these years that it affected his normal vision? Su Zipei thought that it was a blessing in disguise today. She had a chance encounter with the noble master. She was happy. Unexpectedly, the master's face suddenly became cold. She was confused. Before she reacted, she saw the middle-aged man waved his hand with flagging interest and returned to the sedan chair. He said, "Give her some silver as compensation for being frightened. Let's go." The housekeeper seemed to be accustomed to his master's eccentric behavior. He quickly threw a few silver ingots beside Su Zipei and hurriedly called the servants to continue to the Shenwu Square. Su Zipei stared at the back of the sedan chair that went away and then looked down at the silver on the ground. The rich master just left like this. She expected in vain. Su Zipei picked up the silver on the ground and put it in her arms. She spat and said, "People in Yunjing City are really as annoying as my second sister." The middle-aged man who was still paying attention to Su Zipei in the sedan chair saw this scene and shook his head gently. He finally gave up the idea in his mind. How could such a rude girl be his daughter? The sedan chair turned a corner and disappeared. Su Zipei also patted her clothes and stood up. But this pat instantly made her face pale. She didn't dare to look at her waist. She only groped with her hands. But she didn't find anything hard after groping for several times. Finally, she couldn't help but look down. She saw that her waist was empty. She suddenly blacked out and collapsed on the ground. The jade pendant was lost. Her biggest reliance in Yunjing was gone. Without the jade pendant, how could she recognize her ancestors and enter a rich and powerful family? No, it must have fallen on the ground when I ran. Su Zipei knelt on the ground and cried for a moment. Then she immediately looked for it crazily along the road. If there were no people on the street because of the Baisho feast, her crazy behavior would be a first-class scandal the next day. Where is it? Where is it? The more she looked for it, the more panicked and desperate Su Zipei was. Her eyes were full of tears and her sight was blurred. If it was really picked up by someone, she couldn't find it. When Su Zipei was still crazy on the street, the sedan chair had stopped at the edge of the Shinwu Square. The middle-aged man walked out of the sedan chair and looked at the 7-story building in the distance. He murmured, "I haven't come to the Baisho building for many years." The butler said at the right time, "The emperor said that the Baisho building always belongs to you. There will be no other owner." The middle-aged man shook his head and walked to the Baisho building with a depressed face. If his luxurious robe was ignored, he looked like a scholar who was down and out. "It has been so many years. You still can't let it go?" The butler sighed and quickly followed him. At this time, Xian Jingzhou and his wife were taking the meat in the square with a basin. How could they miss such a good opportunity to take advantage of the Baisho building? The proprietress was stuffing meat into her mouth when the royal guards were not paying attention. She looked around cleverly. Suddenly, she turned her eyes and saw the back of the middle-aged man who went into the Baisho building. The smile on her face disappeared instantly, and her ordinary eyes were full of killing intent. "What?" The butler noticed the gaze and looked back suddenly. But he found that the square was noisy, and no one released killing intent at all. "Illusion?" The butler shook his head and followed the master into the building. Even if it was not an illusion, the person in the dark would not be so stupid to fight here. Xian Jingzhou was relieved when he saw the butler walk in. He didn't let go of the proprietress's hand and transmitted the sound in silence, "Calm down. Have you forgotten what the abbot of Mount Chan said? Do you have the heart to destroy our 7 years of hard work today?" The proprietress took a deep breath, and the red light in her eyes faded away. She bowed her head and continued to take the meat. Xian Jingzhou couldn't see her face, but he heard her angry words. "I just can't accept it. My sister died just like that, but he can live without a care in the world. How could he?" Xian Jingzhou sighed and comforted the proprietress softly, "Let's talk about it when we go back. It's not safe here." Xian Jingzhou didn't hate the man as much as the proprietress. Because he was not the heartless scum in the words of the proprietress. As a prince, he didn't marry in his life. Didn't it explain the problem? But he didn't dare to say this to his wife. As soon as they entered the Baisho building, the middle-aged man attracted the attention of most young people. He seemed to be born with a unique charm, which made people couldn't help but look at him. "Who is he? I don't know him." Few young talents who could stand here didn't know the dignitaries in Yunjing City. But today, no one could tell the identity of the middle-aged man. "Master, let's go upstairs," the butler suggested carefully. The middle-aged man stood on the first floor for a long time and didn't want to go upstairs for a long time. He glanced at every corner of the Baisho building, and it seemed that the scene in those years appeared in his eyes. It was a pity that the youth had passed. The people and things in those years couldn't come back. "Master, it's time to go upstairs. If it's too late, you will lose face when the banquet starts on the top floor." The butler couldn't help but remind him again. The middle-aged man snorted and went upstairs. "How can I lose face now?" "Master," the butler sighed and quickly bent down to follow him. At this moment, Su Li was sitting on the top floor and drinking alone. No one dared to get close to her within 1 meter. Because Playboy Ling said that whoever dared to do anything to her couldn't leave the Baisho building alive today. Su Li was helpless. She could only let Ling Li, the childish guy, do whatever he wanted. Fortunately, Ma Jintian came to provoke him, and Ling Li was busy arguing with him. So, she could hear a lot of peace. If she wanted to act well, she must integrate herself into the role. Su Li glanced at the two people who were still arguing with each other. She couldn't help but feel a little funny. Ling Li played the playboy for more than 10 years, and he undoubtedly played the role perfectly. Step, 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 at this moment, slow footsteps sounded from the direction of the stairs. Many people turned to look at the direction of the stairs. Who came upstairs? When the face of the middle-aged man appeared in front of everyone, there was a sound of wine glasses falling on the ground. Then, there was a violent uproar. He, unexpectedly, comes here. He hasn't been out of the mansion for more than 10 years, right? He unexpectedly appears this year. Someone said that he was seriously ill, so he could only recuperate at home and couldn't go out. Who is he? The profound families recognized the middle-aged man at a glance, but some emerging families didn't know who he was. Su Li was attracted by the sound and turned to look. The next moment, her pupils suddenly shrank. She seemed to be hit by a heavy hammer. She couldn't hold the wine glass in her hand anymore and let it fall on the table. The wine spilled on the ground. It was him, the first prince, the third prince and the fifth prince almost stood up at the same time. They walked to the middle-aged man and bowed to him. The reason was that he was the younger brother of the emperor, the eighth lord of Dahan country, Lord Rui. Chapter 189. The princes who were learning to speak at that time had grown up in the blink of an eye. All of them were talented and handsome. Lord Rui didn't show a happy face for a long time. He smiled bitterly. 17 years had passed in the blink of an eye. There are talented people in every generation. The new generation excels the old. You have all grown up. You should learn to share the state affairs for your father. Don't be lazy. Yes, your nephew has learned something. The three of them answered respectfully. Each of them shouted louder than the other, but they had their own thoughts. Uncle Rui was less than 40 years old, but half of his hair was white. If he didn't have few wrinkles on his face, he would look as old as their father who was 60 years old. Is it true that what happened that year? Dong Fengshen was surprised. He was born the earliest. When that happened, he was sensible. There were rumors everywhere in the imperial palace. He still remembered some of them. As for the third brother and the fifth brother, they should know nothing about it. Since the woman left Yunjing, the scandal about Lord Rui was blocked by the order of their father. If anyone dared to gossip about it, he would face the torture of pulling out his tongue. Wu Jin of the Wu family greets Lord Rui. I am Ma Jintian of the Ma family. Then, all the young masters hurriedly saluted. He was the lord of the Dahan country and the younger brother of the emperor. His identity was more distinguished than anyone present. Only Ling Li sat in the wheelchair. He squinted at them and shouted, "Who is Lord Rui?" Ah! I have never heard of him. Is he a fake? The crowd burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, this idiot even dares to scold Lord Rui? If you are arrogant for a long time, you will get into trouble. No matter how powerful Ling Li is, he absolutely doesn't dare to be presumptuous in front of Lord Rui. Lord Rui raised his eyebrows and turned around. When he saw Ling Li's sloppy appearance, he couldn't help but frown. This guy was obviously a playboy. How could he go to the top floor? Lord, he is Ling Li, the second son of the Ling family. When he was a child, his legs were disabled. In addition, General Ling and General Ling both died in battle. He was not disciplined. So he became like this. The butler transmitted the sound to explain in time. Lord Rui's eyes eased, but he still walked towards Ling Li. People's eyes kept moving with his movements. It was a rare scene that the playboy Ling Li was scolded. When they went back, they would draw it and hang it on the wall to vent their hatred. Lord Rui stopped and sat in front of Ling Li's table. He looked at Ling Li's disdainful face and said in a low voice, "Your father and grandfather are great heroes. Even if you were plotted against and lost your legs, you shouldn't end up like this. You're embarrassing your father and grandfather." Ling Li of wine. He knocked on the table. He said in of Ling of Ling Emperor. Of the wine. Of Ling said of roof of. 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 Of 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 of. 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 Sure enough, Ling Li knocked on the table with a bang, and the wine spilled. He said, "Who do you think you are? My father and grandfather died for your Dongfang family. I am disabled. Who do you think you are? My father and grandfather died for your Dongfang family. I am disabled. Does the Dongfang family think that you can laugh at us as you please?" What? Hearing that, the three princes all changed their faces and rushed to Ling Li angrily. Dong Fangxing said in an imposing manner, "Ling Li, it is treason to talk about the royal family. Do you know your crime?" Ling Li was not annoyed. Instead, he pointed at Dong Fangxing's face and said to Lord Rui with a smile, "Ha ha ha. Look, you want to punish me. If you are really a member of the Dongfang family, don't hang around in front of me. You are disgusting. You." Dong Fangsheng was scolded with a red face. He looked at Uncle, but Lord Rui didn't move. For a moment, there was a long silence. Finally, Lord Rui moved his lips. He looked apologetic. Ling Li's character had been formed. It would take a long time to change him. It was really inappropriate for him to rashly talk about the Ling family. But his identity was related to the royal family. He couldn't apologize publicly. "Sheng, you all leave first. I want to talk to him alone." Seeing that Uncle didn't punish Ling Li but seemed to be interested in Ling Li, the three princes frowned slightly. None of them got the support of the Ling family. Naturally, they didn't want Lord Rui to be too close to the Ling family. However, on this occasion, it was expected that they wouldn't talk too much. Besides, facing Ling Li, who was an idiot, they might not even have a good talk. Thinking of this, Dong Fangyang smiled and took a step back. "Uncle, take your time. I will leave first." After the fifth prince left, the other two princes also left one after another. Although there were still people peeping at them from time to time, they were far away and the old butler was monitoring them. So, their conversation was not overheard. After venting his anger, Ling Li felt happy and became lazy again. He scratched his chest without any image and lay down on the wheelchair. Ling Mo bent down beside him, lifted his right foot that was about to fall to the ground, put it back to the original position, and covered it with a blanket. The butler saw the exposed muscle atrophy and almost no flesh on the foot. He immediately shook his head slightly. It seemed that the legs of the third master of the Ling family were completely incurable. "Lord Rui, you stay alone. What do you want to preach to me?" Lord Rui lowered his head slightly and whispered, "I was rude just now. I have to admit my mistake. Even if you are a good-for-nothing playboy, I will apologize to you." The old butler's expression changed slightly. He held Lord Rui's shoulder and said, "Master." Ling Li was a little surprised, and all kinds of thoughts emerged in his mind. Dongfang Rui was interesting. Ordinary people couldn't have such a broad-mindedness. He could get a lot of fans only by his personal charm. How could he end up alone? Lord Rui's apology. "You are a hereditary lord and the brother of the emperor." "I can't afford it," Ling Li smiled faintly. He took the jade pendant from Ling Mo's hand and played with it. Su Zipei should be crazy now. However, although the quality of this half-jade pendant was good, it was just broken jade. Su Zipei didn't seem to be a person who would cherish it. Dongfang Rui was a little angry when he heard that Ling Li didn't accept his apology. He raised his head and saw the jade pendant in Ling Li's hand. His body immediately trembled uncontrollably. This time, it was not an illusion. What? Ling Li noticed something strange. Seeing Dongfang Rui staring at the jade pendant in his hand, he seemed to be fixed. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. It turned out to be like this. "Ling Li, can you show me the jade pendant in your hand?" Dongfang Rui was so excited that he completely lost his calmness as a lord. The old butler was worried. It was true that the lord was ill. Recently, the lord got better. He couldn't have another accident. Ling Li smiled evilly and put the jade pendant on the table. Dongfang Rui immediately grabbed it and looked at it carefully, as if he got a treasure. The fracture was smooth. The jade pendant wouldn't be pricked and bleed anymore. But he knew that this jade pendant was the one he gave to her. It couldn't be wrong. Was Ling Li his son? Lord Rui was confused. When Yun left Yunjing, he couldn't see that she was pregnant. How could she entrust the child to the Ling family? After all, the onlooker saw the game more clearly than the onlooker. Seeing that his master lost his composure, the old butler immediately asked for him, "Child Ling, can you tell me where you got this jade pendant?" "Yes." Lord Rui suddenly realized that Ling Li was a playboy. He often flirted with girls. This jade pendant definitely didn't belong to him. He snatched it from a girl. In an instant, Dongfang Rui's eyes became extremely terrible. He said, "Ling Li, if you dare, Lord Rui, don't be angry." Ling Li interrupted Dongfang Rui with a smile. He sneered, "It seems that this jade pendant is very important to you. Why did you lose it?" "However, I didn't snatch this jade pendant. I borrowed it from a young lady. If you don't believe it, you can ask her in person." After Ling Li said that, he pointed to the direction where Su Li sat. Dongfang Rui immediately turned his head, but he found that there was no one at the table. "Are you kidding me?" Dongfang Rui suddenly turned his head and looked angry. But he found that Ling Li also frowned. His expression didn't seem to be fake. He muttered to himself, "It's strange. Where is Su Li?" Su Li. Her surname was Su. Dongfang Rui was shocked and rushed to the stairs. Since she was not on the top floor, it meant that she went downstairs. She was still here when he came, but now she went downstairs and left. She knew her origin. Su Li. Dongfang Rui went down to the 6th floor and shouted loudly. All the young people were shocked. Why did he call Miss Su Li's name? "Master." The old butler chased after him anxiously. He said, "Master, don't worry. The Baisho building is your property. I asked just now. Miss Su Li just went out of the gate. We can catch up with her." Dongfang Rui heard that and opened his robe. He used his martial arts to jump out of the window. The surprise came unexpectedly, but he had already prepared for it. He had been waiting for this day for 17 years. "Master." The old butler was shocked. He rushed to the window and looked down. The master hadn't used his cultivation for more than 10 years. What if he accidentally fell? He looked out and saw the master landed smoothly and stopped. The old butler heaved a sigh of relief and walked down the stairs. Bang! Su Li looked coldly at Dongfang Rui, who suddenly fell from the sky. She didn't say a word. Seeing Su Li, Dongfang Rui's longing and excitement all turned into a trickle. He was silent. His majestic eyes were slightly red at the moment. His lips wriggled, but he couldn't say a word. Her name was Su Li. Although she didn't look like me and Yun, her cold and arrogant temperament was very similar to Yun's. They were practically carved from the same mold. This time, it couldn't be wrong. "Did your mother give you your name?" Dongfang Rui said this in a trembling voice. He covered his chest and his heart couldn't stop beating. Su Li made a salute and smiled lightly. She said softly, "Lord Rui, I gave my name by myself. I am a member of the Su family. The jade pendant is not mine. Lord, I'm afraid that you have mistaken me for someone else." Dongfang Rui was completely stunned. Did Ling Li lie to him? Or Su Li didn't recognize him? He had imagined the scene of meeting his daughter 10,000 times, but he had never been so heartless. Su Li didn't even give him the chance to say, "I am your biological father." Su Li pursed her lips and stepped back. She bowed her head and said, "If you have nothing else, I should leave." Chapter 190. Master. The old butler came out of the Baisho building and saw Dongfang Rui standing there alone. He was shocked. Did Su Li leave? Wu Bin, why didn't she give me a chance to talk? Why did she leave alone? The old servant called Wu Bin was startled and immediately comforted. Master, maybe she really isn't your daughter. When that person left, no one knew that she was pregnant. Later, when the corpse was sent here, although this fact was discovered, no one knows whether your daughter is still alive in this world. Dongfang Rui was expressionless. He spread out his right hand and asked, "What about the jade pendant? How do you explain this jade pendant?" This, the old steward sighed in his heart. Maybe that girl picked up the jade pendant somewhere and kept hearing about you from somewhere, so she came to try her luck. Maybe she's playing hard to get. Master, you must be calm. Slap. It was another slap. Dongfang Rui was angry and said, "Bastard. Back then, you stopped me, and now you're disturbing my thoughts. Do you really want me to be childless and live this life?" "Of course not. Master, I also hope to find Miss." The old butler covered his face and hurriedly explained. It was because of his guilt that he gave up a bright future in the imperial palace and was willing to be an old servant of Dongfang Rui. In these years, even if Dongfang Rui often beat and scolded him, he had no complaints. Because back then, when he personally brought that person's corpse back, he understood that he would never be able to repay the debt he owed in his life. "Master, did you see half of the jade pendant on the road?" Su Zipei walked to Dongfang Rui step by step. She was dirty all over and said with a pitiful cry, "I lost the jade pendant my mother left to me." It was her. The old butler was shocked. It was the little girl he met on the road. Dongfang Rui looked at Su Zipei who was crying. He suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "What's your name?" Su Zipei was confused, but she still replied, "My name is Su Zipei." Her surname was Su again. Dongfang Rui was completely confused. Which one was his daughter? My jade pendant. Su Zipei suddenly saw a corner of the jade pendant in Dongfang Rui's hand. Her eyes lit up and she seemed to be alive. She grabbed it and ran away. This child's upbringing, Dongfang Rui felt disgusted. But he thought that if his daughter really lived alone in these years and no one taught her the truth of life, it was understandable that she became like this. However, deep in his heart, Dongfang Rui still hoped that Ling Li didn't lie. After all, Su Li was more like him. "Master, leave this matter to this old servant. This old servant will definitely investigate the origins of these two ladies." Dongfang Rui nodded slightly. Suddenly, he felt that the world was spinning and he couldn't stand steadily. The butler was so scared that he hurried to hold him. Pushing away the butler, Dongfang Rui waved his hand and said, "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired. Go back." About the auction house, when the butler asked about the business, Dongfang Rui had already stepped into the sedan. His voice came from the sedan, "Let Commander Hu handle it. Except for the jade pendant, don't worry about anything else." "Yes, master." After the sedan left, Commander Hu received the message from the butler. He immediately laughed loudly and said, "Commander Wu, leave it to me. I haven't seen you for many years. How are you?" The old butler hurriedly waved his hand and said, "What commander? I have resigned my position for more than 10 years. Now I am just an old servant of the master." "Commander." "Senior Wu, why did you do that?" Commander Hu sighed. The old butler shook his head and said, "I made a mistake. The master is not in good health. I will go back to take care of him. Go ahead with your business." Seeing the old butler hurrying away, Commander Hu had mixed feelings in his heart. At that time, he was just a bodyguard of Wu Bin. If it weren't for Wu Bin's appreciation, he would not be the commander of the royal guards. It's true that the world is changeable, Hu Dayton sighed in his heart. He put down the meat in the square and strode to the Baisho building. Ling Li crouched by the window on the 7th floor and watched the whole process. There were many thoughts in his mind. When he figured out the cause, a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. When Su Li was bullied by the Su family in the Desu town, he never doubted Su Li's origin. In other words, he was fascinated by Su Li's hardworking attitude. Today, the jade pendant obviously had a story, and it was likely that Dongfang Rui met the right person by accident. Ling Qinglan has recovered recently. He has nothing to do, so he asks me for errands again and again. Ha! Now I have a problem. It was easy for the Lord Rui's mansion to investigate the origin of Su Zipei and Su Li. In just one afternoon, Wu Bin found out the details of the two. The two girls are sisters. Wu Bin was shocked when he got the result. So, would the madam give birth to twins? No. Before getting the exact news, it was better not to make the master too excited. Tell the servants not to tell the master. I will change clothes and go out. You guard the Lord's mansion. Most of the guards in the Lord Rui's mansion were Wu Bin's guards. Because of what happened in those years, he took great pains to strengthen the defense force of the Lord Rui's mansion. The elite force left in the Lord Rui's mansion was even more than a group of people around Hu Dayton. After changing into the official uniform of the Ministry of Revenue, Wu Bin looked at himself. After confirming that he didn't miss anything, he flashed to the Su family's mansion. At the same time, Su Zipei returned to the Lord Rui's mansion. When she came to Zhu Yan's room, she found that the mysterious masked woman was also there. Zhu Yan was full of excitement. She held Su Zipei's hand and said, "Zipei, your chance finally comes. My painstaking efforts are not in vain." Su Zipei stared at her mother blankly. She hadn't recovered from the thrill today. Knock, knock. Wu Bin knocked on the door of the Su house. The gatekeeper opened the door with a puzzled look. When he saw an official, he immediately became respectful. "What can I do for you, Lord?" Wu Bin pointed to the register in his hand and said with a smile, "Is Lord Su at home?" The gatekeeper shook his head and hurriedly opened the door. "Master has been busy and hasn't returned for many days." "Lord, please come in and wait for a moment. I will invite the Lord out." Wu Bin nodded. After being led to the main hall of the front house, the gatekeeper trotted all the way and disappeared in the yard path. Wu Bin looked at the architectural style of the Su family and found that although the Su family was an unknown small family, the layout of the yard was also unique. The foster mother of the Miss should be a well-educated and reasonable woman. In this way, it was more likely that Su Li was the daughter of the Lord. At this moment, there came a sound of footsteps. Wu Bin quickly got up and saw Su Huanli hurrying over. Wu Bin cupped his hands and smiled, "Lord, please forgive me for not going out to welcome you. My son hasn't returned yet. May I ask your name and why do you visit my house?" Wu Bin nodded and said the excuse that he had thought before, "It doesn't matter if Lord Su is not at home. I am an inspector of the Ministry of Revenue. My surname is Wu. Lord Su moved here and the Su family has not been registered yet. So, I come here to register for the Su family." "I see." Su Huanli smiled and bowed again and again, "Lord, you work so hard at night. It's really hard for you. I will call my family members to come here and cooperate with you to register." "That's good." Wu Bin was relieved. Su Huanli was simple-minded and quite easy to deal with. "Before long, ma'am." Su Chui, Zhu Yan, Li Yuelian, Su Qinghao and Su Zipei all arrived, except Su Li. When Wu Bin saw Li Yuelian and Zhu Yan, he secretly thought that there were two madams in the Su family. Su Huanli, 42 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Zhu Yan, 39 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Li Yuelian, 38 years old, from the Desu town of Qinghe province, Su Qinghao, Wu Bin was patient and finally waited for Su Zipei. Su Zipei, 10. When Su Huanli was about to say the information of Su Zipei, Zhu Yan jumped out at this time and said with a smile, Lord, let me do it. Zipei and Li are both my daughters. I know their ages best. Su Huanli felt it was reasonable. To be honest, he remembered the ages of his two sons, but he didn't know how old the two girls were. He only knew that they were at the age of marriage. Wu Bin raised his head and looked at Zhu Yan. Since Su Li and Su Zipei were both her daughters, she must be the foster mother of the miss. The year when Madame ran away was 17 years ago. She was pregnant for 10 months and was born. The miss was 16 years old. It would be best if there was a difference in age. Su Zipei, 16 years old, was born in the Qinghe town. Su Li, 17 years old. Wu Bin stopped writing and raised his head with his eyes shining. Is it true? Zhu Yan was scared by Wu Bin's sharp eyes and stepped back a few steps. She nodded without hesitation and said, Of course. It's just the information of my two daughters. I dare not deceive you. What about the birth information? Tell me the birth information of your two daughters. Zhu Yan's expression changed slightly. Of course, she remembered Su Zipei's birth information, but it couldn't be used. As for Su Li's, she didn't remember it and couldn't tell it. Zhu Yan's reaction made Wu Bin think that he got the key. The woman couldn't tell Su Zipei's birth information. It was clear that Su Zipei was the child Zhu Yan picked up. It seemed that Zhu Yan had kept this information for many years alone, and even Su Huanli didn't know it. No wonder that he couldn't find the Su family when he thoroughly investigated the Qinghe province. Great, the miss was still alive. For a moment, he looked at Su Zipei with gentle eyes, but he didn't know that behind the latter's ignorant expression, there was a restless and ecstatic heart. Turning around, Wu Bin became more respectful. He bowed to Zhu Yan and said, I just asked casually. Since you don't want to answer, forget it. My master will visit you tomorrow. I hope Madame Zhu and your daughter Su Zipei can make preparations. What preparations? Su Huanli was confused and panicked. Why did the official's master come to visit when he just asked some basic information? Upon hearing this, Wu Bin let out a clear laugh and said, Presumably, Madame Zhu already knows the specifics. This old servant thanks Madame Zhu for raising young miss for so many years. Then he bowed deeply and left the mansion. He disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yan, what's going on? What does Madame Suchui mean? Ma'am. Suchui was confused, but she still asked with a happy face. After the Lord asked about Su Zipei and Su Li, his attitude to Zhu Yan immediately became extremely good. It must be a good thing. Alas. Chapter 191. What? You bitch, how dare you lie to me for so many years? Su Huanli was shocked. How could his biological daughter become a loser who was picked up? This time, Zhu Yan was not afraid but sneered. Ma'am. Su Chui saw that the situation was not good and immediately stood up to be a peacemaker. Son. Don't get angry yet. Xiao Yan hasn't finished yet. Seeing that ma'am. Su Chui defended her, Zhu Yan felt warm and said, Mother. Don't say that. Even if I am no longer your daughter-in-law, you are still my mother. Yan, you. Ma'am. Su Chui understood the meaning of Zhu Yan's words and was flustered. At this moment, Zhu Yan straightened her back and pointed at Su Huanli's nose and scolded, Su Huanli. I must have been blind to marry you, such a greedy and ruthless man. Zipei was adopted by me, so what? You can divorce me today if you have the guts. Gu Shijiu said with a smile. You. Good. Su Huanli was so angry that his face turned red. He looked at the luxurious furniture and was reluctant to smash it. He was so angry that he said, Zhu Yan, we have been married for so many years. When did I owe you anything? Since you don't want to stay, get out. Never. Son, calm down. Ma'am. Su Chui persuaded her. Su Huanli was so angry that he couldn't listen to her. He found a pen and paper and wrote a letter of divorce. Seeing this divorce letter, Zhu Yan was overjoyed. In this way, she could live in Lord Rui's mansion justifiably. That was the mansion of the 8th Lord. Good. Su Huanli, you have guts. Zipei and I will stay here for one more night and leave tomorrow. Zhu Yan took Zipei's hand and left hurriedly. She didn't mention Su Li at all. From beginning to end, Li Yuelian was silent. Su Qinghao wanted to say something several times but was stopped by her. Zhu Yan was so kind that she picked up a child from the roadside and raised it. Anyone who knew the affairs of the Su family could tell at a glance which one was picked up and which one was born. Moreover, she clearly misreported the age of Su Li and Su Zipei. She deliberately said that they were 1 year older. According to the original age, Su Li was only 16 years old and Su Zipei was only 15 years old. If the person who claimed to be an old servant was really a servant of a noble family, it should be Su Li who became the first Mississippi. But now it was Su Zipei. Obviously, Grandma also knew the age. Thinking of this, Li Yuelian looked at Ma'am Su Chui, but she saw that Ma'am Su Chui was also looking at her with a pair of warning and fierce eyes. She wanted her to shut. Li Yuelian took a deep breath and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Zhu Yan knew that someone would deliberately test them in disguise. This kind of thing could not be done by Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. Su, Qing long as, she. Long as she, many, she, Su, she, many, a, many, she, a, one, li, one, many, and now that Qing Tan was not at home, she did not dare to fight against Ma'am Su Chui in any case. This old woman had always been cruel and merciless. Seeing that it worked, Ma'am Su Chui retracted her eyes and snorted. You are sensible. Back to the room, Su Qinghao held his hands and wondered, Mother, why are you shaking? Are you feeling unwell? Li Yuelian smiled reluctantly and touched Su Qinghao's round head. She calmed down and said, I'm fine. Mom, why didn't you let me say it just now? Auntie clearly remembered second sister and third sister's ages wrongly. She's really muddle-headed. Li Yuelian's face changed greatly. She grabbed Su Qinghao's little hand and said seriously, Qinghao. Remember, don't tell anyone about this. Otherwise, you and I won't have a good time. Su Qinghao rolled his eyes and was more confused, but Mother, didn't you teach me that it's not good to lie? Hearing this, Li Yuelian's nose turned sour and tears fell. But this was the world of the adults, Qinghao. The world of the adults was full of lies and deceit. Seeing his mother crying, Su Qinghao hurriedly wiped Li Yuelian's tears sensibly and comforted her, Mother, don't cry. I won't say it. I will become a big official like my eldest brother in the future and make you happy every day. Qinghao, Li Yuelian smiled through tears. No matter how bad the Su family was, it was enough for her to have 2 sensible and promising sons. Su Qinghao, who was lying in her arms, blinked his eyes. Although he didn't quite understand what happened today, as long as the evil aunt intervened, it must be bad for second sister. By the way, second sister didn't come today. Su Qinghao seemed to think of the key, but he didn't tell his mother this time. The young boy also gradually learned to protect the people close to him in his own way. In the middle of the night, everyone fell asleep. Su Qinghao got up from the bed, got out of bed, put on his shoes, put on a cold cloak and went out of the door. Children in Dahan country had to sleep separately from their parents after they were 10 years old. He was already 11 years old this year. There was no one else in the whole yard except Sister Dong, who took care of his daily life. Carefully lying by the window, Su Qinghao heard that Sister Dong was asleep and wouldn't wake up for a short time. His childish face showed a happy expression. He immediately trotted out of the yard and ran to Su Li's yard. His small body was covered by the bushes, so he didn't attract others' attention. He successfully came to Su Li's yard in a quarter of an hour and knocked on Su Li's door carefully. Because of the Baisho feast, he clearly remembered that second sister came back today. Su Li was indeed in the room. At the moment when Su Qinghao stepped into the yard, she found him. She didn't get any clue about how her mother died and how her mother abandoned her. She didn't even know her mother's name. Dongfang Rui appeared too suddenly. Because of Ling Li's interference, she met Dongfang Rui too early. So, she didn't know what kind of attitude to treat him. She was confused. So, Su Li didn't go back to the affiliated school of the National Academy to practice. Instead, she returned to the messy Su family. Seeing the Su family quarreling selfishly, she could calm down quickly. After her rebirth, many things were out of her control. Only the fate of the Su family was still in her hands. Second sister, are you there? The voice of the fourth brother came. Su Li smiled and stood up in the dark. She opened the door and said with concern, "Fourth brother, why do you come here in the middle of the night? It's cold outside. Come in and don't catch a cold." Su Qinghao smirked and rushed into the room. He rubbed his hands and rolled his eyes. He whispered, "Second sister, a strange old man came to our house tonight. He asked about you and third sister. First sister deliberately said that you and third sister are 1 year older." The strange old man was very happy and left. "I think first sister must want to do bad things to you again. Although my mother didn't allow me to say it," she cried. "But if I don't say it, I am not a man to protect second sister. Eldest brother will definitely blame me if he knows it." Su Li chuckled. It was a serious topic, but when Su Qinghao said it, she didn't feel it was serious at all. "Good job, Qinghao." Su Li squatted down and hugged Su Qinghao. She kissed him on his right cheek. Su Qinghao's little face suddenly turned red, and smoke almost came out of his head. "Second sister," she kissed him. "Well, go back. I already know it. You should go back and have a good sleep." Su Qinghao turned around in a panic and walked to the door. He turned back with a bright smile and said, "Second sister, you should also have a good sleep. Eldest brother and I will definitely protect you." Su Li smiled and her eyes were like crescent moons. "I couldn't protect you in the previous life. But in this life, I will never let you stop at the age of 15. After sending Su Qinghao away, Su Li was surprisingly calm. At this moment, she thought it through. No matter what the truth behind Lord Rui and her mother was, the eldest brother and the fourth brother would always stand on her side. In this life, she was not alone. That was enough. Su Li returned to the affiliated school of the National Academy overnight. Even if she knew what would happen during the day, she still left. The Su family had the same opinion. She had no ability to refute. Instead, she would be regarded as a liar who wanted to enter the Lord's mansion by Dongfang Rui. She didn't need to be so miserable. Early the next morning, Dongfang Rui came to the gate of the Su family in splendid clothes. He brought a large number of thank you gifts and a luxury carriage with the royal seal. Swish, swish, swish. Dozens of personal guards of the Lord's mansion lined up from both sides to the gate of the Su family. The ground was shaking. The Su family was immediately alarmed. The gatekeeper opened the gate and poked his head out. When he saw such a scene, he was so scared that he fainted. Dongfang Rui was radiant today and in a very good mood. He waved his sleeves and couldn't wait to step into the gate of the Su family. Su Huanli just came out of the yard of the back room. When he saw the gate was open, he was so scared that he almost peed his pants. But he soon saw the old servant who was following the middle-aged man in a splendid robe. Wasn't he the person who came to check the household yesterday? Wu Bin came forward and made a fist and palm salute to apologize. Head of the Su family, sorry. Yesterday, I pretended to be the inspector of the Ministry of Revenue. I had no choice but to verify something for my master. Su Huanli nodded his head blankly. He had never seen such a noble royal. He couldn't help but ask, this is... Wu Bin bowed slightly and said with a smile, this is my master, the 8th Lord of the Dahan country and the younger brother of the Emperor, Lord Rui. Lord. The younger brother of the Emperor? Su Huanli almost fainted like the gatekeeper. When did the Su family have a relationship with the Lord's mansion? Dongfang Rui smiled and said, head of the Su family, this time I only come for my biological daughter, Su Zipei. Because of many things, I lost her outside. Fortunately, the first madam of the Su family picked her up and raised her. I can't repay you. If you have any requirements, just tell me. Su Zipei turned out to be the biological daughter of Lord Rui. Didn't it mean that the Su family was going to be rich? Su Huanli just realized it. He was shocked and ecstatic. But then he thought of a terrible fact. Last night, he had divorced Zhu Yan. That woman did it on purpose. I'm doomed. Puff. Under great joy and great sorrow, Su Huanli raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He fell to the ground and fainted. Wu Bin was shocked and quickly asked someone to arrange Su Huanli's treatment. At this moment, Su Zipei and Zhu Yan, who had dressed up exquisitely, came out. Dongfang Rui's eyes brightened. It was her. Since he accepted that Su Zipei was his daughter, even if Su Zipei didn't dress up, Dongfang Rui could also recognize her. At this moment, he almost felt guilty about Su Zipei. Zhu Yan thought of the mysterious woman's words. She suppressed her excitement and sighed, are you Zipei's biological father? Since the old man came to me yesterday, I knew that there would be such a day. Su Zipei's eyes were full of tears of joy. Seeing Dongfang Rui who was like a god, she couldn't help but yearn for him. She threw herself into Dongfang Rui's arms and shouted tremblingly, Dad. I miss you so much. Dongfang Rui sighed contentedly and tightly held Su Zipei who had grown to his chest. There was no moment in his life that was more satisfying than now. Even if he died now, he would have no regrets. Zhu Yan stood aside and secretly wiped her tears. The plan that she had prepared for more than 10 years finally succeeded. God was kind to her. Wu Bin was happy for Dongfang Rui. The guilt in his heart was relieved a lot. But there was one thing that made him feel uncomfortable. Everything was going too smoothly, so smoothly that he thought he was acting. But he couldn't say why. Maybe it was because of the sudden success after years of hard work that he felt worried about gains and losses. Chapter 192. Su Zipei answered with joy. When she was about to leave with Dongfang Rui, Zhu Yan suddenly pulled her clothes behind her. Then she remembered that she had to arrange for her mother. It was really troublesome. Su Zipei thought so, but she still stopped. Dongfang Rui noticed it and asked, Zipei, what's wrong? Su Zipei hesitated for a moment and said embarrassedly, Father, in fact, my mother quarreled with Father Su yesterday and was divorced. She has nowhere to go now. If I leave like this, it's easy. Hearing that, Dongfang Rui breathed a sigh of relief. He smiled and invited, Mrs. Zhu, since you are free, how about staying in the prince's mansion for a while? It happens that I still don't know much about Zipei. I need to ask you for advice. Zhu Yan was relieved when she heard that. She said happily, Thank you for taking me in, Your Highness. I should thank you. Dongfang Rui shook his head and smiled, Follow me to the carriage. When Su Zipei and Zhu Yan got on the carriage, Wu Bin ran to Dongfang Rui and whispered, Master, how should we arrange the gift? Dongfang Rui looked cold and thought for a moment, since the gift has been sent, there is no reason to take it back. Although the Su family doesn't know Zipei's identity, she doesn't have to worry about food and clothing. Now that Mrs. Zhu has been divorced and the gift has been sent, the Su family has nothing to do with my daughter, Zipei. Yes, master. I know what to do. Wu Bin understood the meaning of Su Zipei's words. The master wanted Su Zipei to draw a clear line with the Su family. He looked back at the mother and son who were whispering happily in the carriage. It seemed that Su Zipei and Zhu Yan had been tired of the Su family for a long time. They didn't feel sad at all when they left today. It seemed that the first Mrs. Moral character was a little worrying under the guidance of Zhu Yan. On this day, the news that Lord Rui's daughter, who had been lost for more than 10 years, returned to the prince's mansion spread all over the city in a blink of an eye and caused a stir. Everyone was discussing which girl was so lucky to enter the royal family. When it was known that it was related to the Su family, everyone was shocked. Is it Su Zipei who was ugly at the Baisho feast? Are you sure that it's not Su Li? TSK, the Su family really hid it well. I heard that she was secretly adopted by Madame Zhu. The day before the news came out, Su family's patriarch even divorced that madam. He really suffered a double loss. If that's the case, then wouldn't the Su family suffer a great loss? One news after another was dug out. For a time, whether it was the disciples of the National Academy or the ordinary people, the family affairs of Lord Rui's mansion became the topic of their after-dinner conversation. However, the Su family in the center of the incident remained silent. Su Huanli was still in a coma. The blow this time was too big for him. On the other side, the Rui prince's residence was full of joy. The prince's residence, which had been deserted for more than 10 years, was now decorated with lanterns and colored banners. There were happy servants and maids everywhere. Miss, are you satisfied with this outfit? A skillful maid combed a beautiful and delicate hairstyle for Su Zipei. The pearls on her head shone brightly. This is the latest style I learned from the palace. The princesses in the palace also dress like you. Really? Su Zipei's eyes were bright. Before she came to Lord Rui's mansion, she never thought that there would be a whole room for her clothes and shoes. She never thought that jewelry and hairpins could be piled up in several boxes for her to choose. When she asked the maid to open the boxes, she was almost blinded by the glittering of the jewelry. Yes, miss, you are a princess now. The standard of dressing is naturally according to the princess. You can't be worse than the princess. The maid was full of sweet words, which made Su Zipei very happy. The maidservant looked at Su Zipei's reflection in the mirror and couldn't help but feel envious. This girl's luck was really good. She was originally just a pheasant in the countryside, but she suddenly flew up the branch and became a phoenix. She was originally an elite maid specially trained in the palace. When she became a palace maid, she might have a chance to be a master. She didn't need to worry about food and clothing. But now she was transferred by the prince to be Su Zipei's maid. However, as long as she could make Su Zipei happy, her life in the prince's mansion would be quite good. Suddenly, the door was opened with a squeak. The maid woke up and quickly bowed her head and left. It was Lord Rui, Dongfang Rui. Dad! Su Zipei stood up and saluted. Seeing that Su Zipei was dressed brilliantly and more like a princess, Dongfang Rui was very comforted. He said gently, Zipei, now your identity has changed. As a princess, you can't be as rude and arrogant as before. You need someone to teach you etiquette. Come with me. Yes, Dad. Su Zipei quickly followed up and was full of expectation. She kept telling herself in her heart. She was already a princess. Her future opponents would not be Su Li, who had no noble identity like her. She should have a long-term vision. She should look at the princesses who were similar to her. Those were the targets she would compare with in the future. Taking a deep breath, Su Zipei calmed down. She followed Dongfang Rui to get on the carriage and left. At noon, the carriage stopped in front of the National Academy. Dongfang Rui took Su Zipei's little hand and got off with a smile. He said gently, "You will stay in the National Academy and learn etiquette from the teacher." Su Zipei was shocked and said, "Dad, am I a student of the National Academy?" "Of course not. If you want to be a real student of the National Academy, you have to pass the final exam. Now I just help you to go through the back door and teach you some etiquette." Dongfang Rui shook his head and laughed. He explained and took Su Zipei in. He was a member of the Dongfang family. The rules of the National Academy were set by the ancestors of the Dongfang family. As a descendant, how could he break the rules of the ancestors? An. Zipei, 3 days later, it will be a good day. I will hold a banquet in the prince's mansion. You can recognize your ancestors and change your surname to Dongfang. You should learn well from the teacher these days. Don't lose your sense of propriety after 3 days. Dongfang Rui was a little nervous and exhorted. But Su Zipei was very happy and nodded without hesitation. Dongfang Rui frowned slightly. Who taught her such a temperament? As the saying went, it was easy to change a leopard's spots. It was not easy for him to let Su Zipei have the temperament and foundation of the Dongfang family. But at this time, Mammy Li passed through the gate of the National Academy with a basket. Every day she went to the rented kitchen yard. Today, there was a magnificent carriage in front of the gate of the National Academy. Of course, she couldn't help but look at it. But when she saw Dongfang Rui with a gentle atmosphere and a smile in front of the carriage, her smile froze immediately. The basket fell from her hand and the eggs were scattered all over the ground. "Master, and, is that the third miss? The jade pendant?" Mammy Li murmured and couldn't believe it. She said, "Is the third miss the little miss?" "No, the first miss was born 16 years ago. The little miss can't be 15 years old." "Who gave Su Zipei the jade pendant?" "Zhu Yan." Thinking of Zhu Yan's selfish face, Mammy Li suddenly realized and couldn't help trembling with excitement. It turned out that Su Li, whom she had been serving, was the little miss. Zhu Yan abused the little miss since she was a child. It turned out that the little miss was not her biological daughter, but the daughter of Su Yun, the former miss. "Miss, I found the little miss. It turns out that I have been with her all the time." Mammy Li stood on the street, crying and laughing like a madwoman. Suddenly, she realized that it was not the time to cry. Master mistook his daughter for someone else. It must be Zhu Yan who made trouble. Zhu Yan replaced her daughter as a princess. How could she bear it? "Master!" She ignored the basket on the ground and rushed to the National Academy. But she was stopped by the vigilant guard before she entered the gate. "Stop! No one can enter without the token." "The token?" Mammy Li realized and quickly searched her body. But she suddenly remembered that Su Li's token was thrown in the basket. She looked back at the basket and saw Dongfang Rui, who was about to disappear at the end of the road of the National Academy. She was so anxious that she was sweating. What should she do? It was too late to go back to get the token. But if she didn't go back to get it, she couldn't enter the National Academy at all. Oh my God! Why did she meet the master but didn't give her a chance to talk to him? Mammy Li covered her chest and was full of despair. She wailed loudly, "Master, she is not your daughter. I am Xiaotsue. Quick, turn around and take a look." Mammy Li's voice was far away, but the road was long enough. Dongfang Rui and Su Zipei didn't hear it. They still laughed and disappeared at the end of the road. Seeing Dongfang Rui disappear in front of her, Mammy Li instantly lost all her strength and collapsed to the ground. The gatekeeper of the National Academy immediately drove her away impatiently. "Where did this crazy woman come from? Get out of here. If you dirty the gate of the National Academy like this, I will ask someone to arrest you." Mammy Li shrank and struggled to stand up. She slowly looked back and picked up the basket. When she saw the token engraved with Su Li lying in the basket, she suddenly became serious. Yes, the little miss was more powerful than the Mississippi. She must have a way to see the master. Thinking of this, Mammy Lee didn't cook. She took the token and ran to the affiliated school of the National Academy. She rushed to Su Li's study in embarrassment and found that she was dirty. Little Miss, Su Li put down the medicine bottle in her hand and raised her head. She frowned and asked with concern, Mammy, why are you like this? What happened? Mammy Lee pinched the corner of her clothes with both hands and looked up at Su Li. But she quickly looked away. Fate played tricks on her. Su Li didn't look like the miss or the master at all. Because of this, Mammy Lee didn't recognize Su Li even though she had been with Su Li for many years. But at this moment, once she accepted the fact that Su Li was the daughter of the miss, she began to find that Su Li's condensed temperament was really like the Mississippi. Seeing Mammy Lee's appearance, Su Li relaxed her eyebrows and said with a smile, Mammy, do you have something to say to me? Mammy Lee raised her head slightly in amazement, but Su Li continued to say, the thing about Su Zipei has been spread all over the city. You should have heard it. As early as in the Qinghe province, I found that you are not simple. In the Qinghe girls' school, you are more familiar with the layout of the girls' school than anyone else. After coming to Yunjing City, many servants were at a loss. Only you, Mammy Lee, seem to have lived in Yunjing City for many years. Now, are you finally going to tell me the truth? Hearing that, Mammy Lee smiled. It turned out that she had been seen through by the little miss. But this time, she didn't feel creeped out. Instead, she felt gratified. The little miss did inherit the miss's mind, and she was better than the Mississippi. My name is Li Xiaozui. I was the personal maid of your birth mother. Miss, you are the biological daughter of Lord Rui. Mammy Lee sighed and finally said the secret buried in her heart for many years. But when she raised her head, she didn't see any change in Su Li's face. Chapter 193. Little Miss, you, Mammy Lee's voice trembled. She didn't expect that Su Li's reaction was so calm, which made her feel cold. Zhu Yan kept the secret so well that she didn't even tell the Su family. There was no reason for the little miss to know. Mammy. After a long time, Su Li finally broke the stiff silence. She smiled as if she didn't care and said, Can you tell me what kind of person my mother is? What happened in those years? According to you, I should be in Yunjing. How could I be in the Desu town, in such a place? In the end, Su Li's voice was uncontrollably hoarse. She complained. Hated. Repented. But was it useful? She struggled desperately in the previous life, but she finally poisoned Lord Rui and was sentenced to death. How did all this happen? Who could she blame? Her dead mother. She often thought that if she didn't appear in the Desu town at the beginning, maybe nothing would happen. Mammy Lee burst into tears when she heard the trembling voice. It turned out that the little miss was not cold-blooded. She just pretended to be strong. She walked over and took off her dirty clothes. She hugged Su Li's thin shoulders tightly and said, Little miss. Your mother didn't abandon you on purpose. She was forced to entrust you to me. It's my fault that I lost you. But I didn't expect that you were with me all the time. After she calmed down, Mammy Lee finally told her what happened in those years. At that time, Su Yun was the most talented girl in the Qinghe town. She entered the Yunjing National Academy with the first place in the major examination. She met Dongfang Rui, who also studied in the National Academy. Finally, they fell in love with each other and promised to marry each other. Su Yun was a rare genius of the wisdom circle in the Dahan country. Such a talent was enough to overshadow her humble background. Her marriage with Dongfang Rui was not stopped. Instead, it was a big event in Yunjing City at that time. But Su Yun disappeared the night before the wedding. I was originally a maid of the Lord Rui's mansion. Later, I was assigned by the Lord to be the personal maid of the Mississippi. The Miss treated me very well. I was naturally grateful. That night, when the Miss went out of the Lord Rui's mansion, she said that someone wanted to talk to her about some private matters. I was worried and followed her secretly. Speaking of what happened in the past, Mammy Lee's eyes flashed with fear. She said, I only practiced some common skills to increase physical strength in the prince's mansion, so I couldn't see clearly what happened at that time. I only remember that there were shadows everywhere around you that night. It seemed that some people were fighting together. I don't know where the strength came from, but I carried the unconscious Miss away. Those people were clearly skilled in martial arts, but they didn't chase me. I wanted to go back to the Miss's mansion, but I found that there were people guarding all the way. I could. At that time, the Miss and I hid here and there. We went to the Mississippi. Then I found at the clan's Mississippi, Sue's Tion. At that time, the Miss and I hid from place to place. We rested in the ruined temple at night and went out to do some odd jobs during the day. With the Miss's wisdom, we hid safely for 9 months. 9 months later, the Miss gave birth to you on a stormy night. She was very weak, but the clan's pursuers came at this time. Speaking of this, Mammy Lee looked painful. She suppressed her voice and said, at that time, the Miss and I were chased to a dead end. Finally, near the Desu town, the Miss entrusted you to me. She chose to face the pursuers alone and left a way for you to live. Su Li narrowed her eyes and smiled. It turned out that her mother was Su Yun. Coincidentally, her surname was Su. Everything in the world had failed her, but her mother didn't. Even though it had been 16 years since what Mammy Lee said, she could still hear Su Yun's love for her from the words. It turned out that she once had the selfish and great family affection. Later, I never heard the news of the Mississippi. I was sleepy and hungry when I held you. Finally, I fell on the side of the road. When I woke up, you were gone. Later, I sold myself to the Su family in order to fill my stomach. Now I think about all kinds of coincidences. Alas! Mammy Lee couldn't help but wipe her tears. The Miss had suffered too much since she was a child. Once she almost died outside. Fortunately, the first master treated her in time. Now every time she thought of it, she would have a cold sweat on her back and be scared. Do you know who Mother went to meet back then? Su Li suddenly asked. Mammy Lee frowned and shook her head. I just became the Mrs. maid at that time. The relationship between us was not close. How could the Miss mention such a secret to me? Su Li thought about it. Mammy Lee said that her mother was a rare genius in the circle of wisdom. It meant that her mother knew the intrigue in Yunjing. The day before the wedding, her mother rashly went out alone to meet others. This kind of thing should not be done by her mother. So, the person that her mother wanted to meet must be someone she absolutely trusted. But if she thought so, there was another problem. According to Mammy Lee's words, her mother went to the capital alone and there was no particularly trustworthy person around her. Unless the person who asked her out to meet was Dongfang Rui. But it was also very abnormal. At that time, her mother had lived in the prince's mansion. If she wanted to meet Dongfang Rui, she could meet him at any time. So, if we know who my mother met with, we can know who the murderer is. Su Li knocked on the table. It was not appropriate for Chu Lu to investigate this matter. The Hehuan sect was an outsider. If they wanted to investigate what happened more than 10 years ago, it was too difficult. It seemed that she needed to use her favor in advance. Little Miss, your top priority now is to explain it to the prince. I was selected by the prince to marry the Mississippi. The prince loves the Miss so much. He must remember me. I just saw the prince enter the National Academy with Su Zipei. As long as you go with me, you can definitely expose Su Zipei. Mammy Lee told her what happened just now. Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly, but said with a smile, "It turns out that Mammy Lee is in conflict with the people of the National Academy." "Oh. Little miss, why are you not anxious at all?" Mammy Lee was so anxious that she was about to get angry. "Think about how you have been living these years. Even the business of the Su family is supported by you. Zhu Yan and Su Zipei took your jade pendant to recognize their relatives. Do you still care about the relationship between you and Zhu Yan?" Su Li was still not in a hurry. She stroked the black shell and said faintly, "Zhu Yan and ma'am. Su Chui repeatedly forced me into a desperate situation, but I forgave them again and again." "Mammy Lee, do you know why?" Mammy Lee was slightly stunned when she heard that. "Isn't it because the miss still cares about the kinship?" Giggle, Su Li laughed out. She looked out of the window and said in a cold voice, "What do I care about? Is it because Zhu Yan always sent people to beat and torture me? Or because she forced me to eat pig's feed and drink muddy water? Or she repeatedly sent killers to assassinate me?" Mammy Lee's hands and feet were cold. It turned out that Zhu Yan not only didn't like Su Li, but also wanted to get rid of her. It was terrible. Under Zhu Yan's various evil schemes, the little miss was not hurt. Instead, she lived better and better. Later, the little miss was completely out of Zhu Yan's control. The little miss was so powerful. Mammy Lee gradually became obedient. She bowed her head and asked, "Miss, what are you going to do?" "I have my own arrangement. Don't worry. You can accompany me to the Lord Rui's mansion 3 days later." Su Li ordered softly and pointed to the scarlet invitation on the table. Mammy Lee's expression changed slightly. It seemed that she knew what the miss would do. "I watched him build a tall building and entertain guests. I watched him collapse." Su Li said leisurely with a smile, "I have long wanted to see how Zhu Yan and my dear third sister would make a fool of themselves in Yunjing City. Now I can finally see it." At this moment, Su Li seemed to be incarnated as a devil. Mammy Lee was cold and speechless. Would the miss want to see such a little miss? In the Moyin Street, Su Li came to the street. Looking at the bustling crowd, she couldn't help but smile sweetly and walked in openly. At the moment when she stepped out, someone from the Tianya house immediately sent the news to Ling Li and others in the Ling mansion. Su Li came to me. Ling Li was slightly surprised. She was so proud that it was impossible for her to seek help for the position of a princess. He was afraid that she came to ask for something else this time. Ling Qinglan raised his head and frowned. How could he forget the life-saving grace? Although Ling Li paid the price, he and Ling Li were different. If he could, he would like to help Su Li restore her identity to repay the life-saving grace. However, he collected a lot of information these days. He found a lot of old things, but there was no information that could help Su Li. "Let's go to the headquarters first. Ling Xian, you stay to deal with accidents." "Yes, master." Ling Xian stood up and watched them leave. Her smile turned cold. When did Su Li even know the headquarters of the Yinma cult? Unless master took her in, she couldn't know it. "Master, you have been fascinated by the witch. It's useless for me to say anything. I can only save the Yinma cult in my own way. Don't blame me." Ling Xian muttered to herself. Her tears fell silently. She turned around and gradually disappeared in the darkness. "Ling Mo, have you found that Ling Xian is a little strange recently?" Ling Li suddenly asked on the way of the carriage. Ling Mo was stunned and then shook his head blankly. He was good at paying attention to the enemy's movements, but women, forget it. "I asked the wrong person." "Qinglan." Ling Li turned his head. Ling Qinglan spread his hands and said helplessly, "Ling Mo doesn't understand women. Do I know them well? However, Ling Xian is a little strange recently. She goes out too many times. Although it's all because of the affairs of the cult, she likes to stay with you before. Is it possible that she finds another man outside and falls in love with him?" Ling Li's face darkened. He knew that Ling Qinglan couldn't say anything good. However, Ling Xian had followed him for so many years, so she was worried. Ling Mo, ask the people around you to secretly check what Ling Xian has been doing recently. Ling Mo's expression changed slightly. He sat up subconsciously and said, use them. Otherwise, what do you want me to do? If I use the power of the cult and the Tianya house, Ling Xian must be aware of it. Ling Li pointed at Ling Qinglan and scolded him, if Ling Xian does something stupid like you, I will be furious. Ling Qinglan didn't know what to say. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.